after 20.
Yeah.
Go and there's this guy from North Carolina, and I mean, he had a southern drawl. My drawl made him bad, but I actually thought he had a drawl. And we were there walking around, and we had these ladies walk up to us, and they just stood there. You know, like, I think it's South Park or something. I don't know if I was offended or honored.
Technically, it's called Serbo-Croatia.
You have lots of family there too?
Mind your way.
So you were with Justin Crowe?
Yes, sir. I was a big 4-H'er.
Keep that in mind if I need
We
you.
can turn this
Okay.
Maybe not.
Turn it off.
Yeah, so, I love guys that just constantly. I think. Middle of the night, I wake up. I'm about almost.
You can now have 3 on.
You didn't sleep good, Mr. Jackson?
Dude,
Just two?
I was so the mattress I was on.
3 of these on.
And then
But you can't, you wouldn't be able to do it, remember?
showers.
Well, I say that.
Broken to activate the.
No, it's supposed to be full. They
Okay.
wanted it to be full.
So it
They
just
just
spun. It broke.
Where would you stay at? Scratchy Shoe?
So it looks like it's, I mean,
Shower.
if you turn this on,
I think we're bad though. I mean,
so you can have the chair and 4 other people.
Did they give you your room?
Do you want to try some? Do you
No,
want to try these?
they're moving the.
You don't have to,
No,
but
I mean, sure, I had used one actually before, because I had a pen, they're rolling, they're rolling, they're
Oh,
rolling.
no.
Sorry. Too much stuff in my hands to catch them.
counter's not very level, is it?
It would appear not. Thanks.
Yeah.
Which
First
ones
floor?
are?
I would like to call the Finance, Ways and Means Committee to order for March 3rd, 2025. And Madam, if you would open the board for roll call, please. Members, please confirm your attendance. Madam Clerk, please take the roll.
Mr. Chairman, you have 17 members present. You have a quorum.
All right, thank you very much, members. First item of business this morning, are there any personal orders this morning? Chairman Faison, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Committee, I just wanted y'all to see that my son Tucker's with me this morning. He is a leap baby, and he turned 3 again last Thursday because we don't have the 29th. But anyway, y'all make him feel welcome.
All right, any other personal orders this morning? All right, seeing none, members, we do have 3 budget hearings, and we're going to be beginning with the Department of Agriculture. And members, just a reminder that all the materials, the presentation documents are on dashboard. So if you would like to log in and see those. Also, just a reminder to our members as well as our guests that we'll be presenting that we do control the microphones up here. So once you see the red light come on, you are ready to talk. So, but you don't have to worry about turning those on. All right. So without objection, we will go out of session. We are now out of session. I'll ask the commissioner, if you would please make your way, you and your staff make your way to the table. And when you are ready, you may begin. And we do want to welcome you again this morning. Thank you all for your attendance.
Well, good morning. I'm Commissioner Hatcher, and we're delighted to present this proposed budget and honored to do it in front of you guys. You might know, excuse me, Andy Holt to my left. Do y'all know him? Okay. We have Chris Eaton, Chief Financial Officer, and then we have Samantha Wilson, our Budget Director. I'm going to follow directions, so I'm going to cover these slides in about 5 minutes. Just broadly, you have the materials in front of you. And then when you get into specifics on questions, I have more, a variety of assistant commissioners in the back that may be applicable to whatever your question is. Is that okay?
That's fine.
Yes.
Absolutely.
So, we really like this proposed budget, and we love what the governor's done in support of agriculture and forestry. You might recognize some of these programs. The first one on the list is Ag Enterprise Fund. It's also sometimes we call that Ag Track. That's a program that started several years back, but it's been bolstered. It's one of our best cost share programs for ag and forestry businesses where we can retain ag and forestry recruitment and retention in the state. And that cost increase is listed at 15 million. The second one is Tennessee Ag Enhancement Program, which is, in our opinion, the best producer cost share program in the United States. And that's a cost increase of $5 million. The third one is Farmland Conservation Fund. That's a fund for permanent conservation easements. That's a voluntary program. It's one of the tools in the toolbox that we're wanting to use to slow the loss of farmland at 25 million. The fourth one is an administration legislation piece for a state meat inspection program. We see value in the state meat inspection program for branding, and it's much needed for especially our small processors, producer processors. And that is $1,866,300. The remaining two are capital projects for 4-H and FFA. The 4-H projects are several centers across the state, and that both of these are to the tune of $46 million. the $46 million for the FFA Lodge at Camp Clements. We do feel like 4-H and FFA are one of our best workforce development tools that we could possibly have. They're very, very successful. 4-H is the largest 4-H program in the United States, and we believe that the FFA, the state program FFA, is in the top 5 in the U.S., and we plan to go to number 1. We had some positions that were moved, some new positions that were created within the Tennessee Department of Agriculture several years ago, and that's reaped great dividends for us. So we view that as workforce development tools and also for the future of agriculture and forestry and leadership training and character building. The second slide is the four-year 2025-26 reductions. And we can get into more detail on this when we get into the question part. But basically, we have a funding swap for forestry deployment. You see that listed. There's also a funding swap for motor fuel revenue as well. And then we have a forestry vehicle savings is the third listed. If we go to industry outlook, the industry outlook for the ag and forestry industry is not good. We've got probably one of the biggest challenges, what I consider one of the biggest challenges in my lifetime and for the presently and currently and for the next decade is farmland loss. We're losing about 10 acres an hour. We know that development and growth is good. We don't want to stop that, but we would like to be able to slow it a little bit and realize the importance of family farms and the need for food and fiber and fuel security. We spend a lot of effort in our programs and in the way we operate working with distressed and at-risk counties. And those are, we feel like there's a lot of opportunities here because of the, in these rural counties, we see farmland and we see trees, and that's our wheelhouse. We just went through, the ag industry just went through the biggest net farm income decline in history with about $90 billion drop for 23-24. 2025 is not predicted to be much better. There's a lot of uncertainty with the tariffs in international trade, and international trade on some of the commodity dollars represents about a third of that dollar. So we've got concerns about that. As you know, Hurricane Helene devastated part of Northeast Tennessee. There's a lot of farming and forestry activities in that area. There was a $1.35 billion economic impact, and we've been working since that disaster, excuse me, with stakeholders, with FEMA, with TEMA, with all the USDA wings, with programs there, and we're currently evaluating those gaps to see what's left after they maximize the federal programs. But that's not it's going to take years or a decade even, or decades to fully recover there. We've been impacted a little bit by federal funding. We've had a pause on some funding, and we can get into detail on that in a few minutes if you'd like to. Let's see. The next slide is the ARPA, federal COVID relief updates. We had a total of 5 projects of $124.8 million. We feel like, excuse me, the state of Tennessee, through your help, has funded some of the best programs that you could for ag and forestry relief. We had the farm program, which was hugely successful. We had the tough program as the farm to food bank program, which farms really like that because we can get more local food to people that are hungry that need it in those areas. We had $3.6 million for the agricultural lab updates, lab equipment ordered and encumbered. All these projects are on track. There was $10.5 million for UT Ag research and education. Projects range from early design to 2 projects in construction. That's on track as well. And the last one is UT Meat Industry Workforce Training Facility. That's in the final design stage. We feel like one thing that we learned from COVID is we didn't have enough small meat processing facilities, and that's an attempt for UT to train up a workforce for that industry. So that's a quick review of the slides, and then we can entertain any questions.
All right. Thank you, Commissioner. Thank you for your presentation. We do have a couple members on the list. So members, if you would like to ask a question or a comment, please be sure to get notification up here to the clerk. Okay. The first person on the list is Chairman Grills. You're recognized, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you all for being here this early Monday morning. Right off the bat, let's just deal with the Ag Enterprise Fund. Last year, you give about 45 awards each. Or I think you've been doing that over the past few years. But just explain to us, if you would, how much you're giving on average with those grants, and then what are they primarily used for?
Okay, if you don't mind, I'm going to pass that to Andy. That's right in his wheelhouse.
Okay.
Hello, esteemed former colleagues. Andy Holt, Tennessee Department of Agriculture Deputy Commissioner and former Assistant Commissioner for Business Development, where we administered the Ag Enterprise Fund, also Ag Track, and also Ag Enhancement Program. And so when we think about the different cost share opportunities that we have within the Department of Agriculture, I kind of liken them to a funnel. And so at the base of the funnel, with impact designed specifically on single operations, is the Tennessee Agriculture Enhancement Program. Many of y'all probably be familiar with it. It's a program that we've operated for many, many years. And there is, again, the proposal to add $5 million recurring revenue that will take that program from $26.5 million to $31.5 million annually. Up from there would be where I would consider to be the Ag Enterprise Fund that you're referencing, Chairman Grills. And what this is a cost share program that's a quarter cost share up to $100,000. And so if a producer comes to us and say they wanted to, some of the average projects would be like the expansion of a sawmilling operation or a commercial grain storage operation or a meat processing facility, where there's going to be a sizable capital outlay and where several either landowners or producers are going to be impacted by that project. So instead of just having a singular impact to a single operation, it has an investment opportunity that can have impact on multiple operations. I don't know what it would be for the average award through Ag Enterprise Fund, but again, it would be pretty close to that $100,000. When we started administering the money for the farm program, which is forestry, agriculture, and rural markets, we recognized that there was a huge desire for cost share opportunities with the state. And those ranged from relatively small projects up to multiple $1-million capital projects. And that's actually where Commissioner Hatcher approached the governor and the General Assembly, and where we expanded these dollars that were associated with the Ag Enterprise Fund, and where we added in the Ag Track opportunity as well. And Ag Track would be an expansion, kind of the top of the funnel. These are typically multi-million-dollar projects. You have to have at least a $2 million capital outlay to qualify for Ag Track. And so this Ag Enterprise Fund, your question, Chairman Grills, is probably in the close to probably $50,000 to $100,000 is the average award.
What would your total for the year, what would that be as far as how much you're using?
So we're going to be pretty close. Maybe the budget office, Mike, can give us the most current numbers. But what we're typically doing, I'm going to let them get some time to look the numbers up while I'll tell you a little bit. What we typically do is we allocate $1.5 million per quarter to allocate for those awards, and that has typically worked out pretty well. We sometimes accrue a budget, but then again, we'll see an expansion, as Commissioner Hatcher mentioned earlier. What we have seen is a retraction in farm income, a pretty significant retraction in farm income. And we understand that obviously there's a change in administration at the federal level. We think that might promote some additional investment in agriculture, may present some new opportunities. And so we might see the outflow of those dollars kick back up because they have come down slightly over the last year.
And I can speak to Samantha Wilson. I can speak towards we spend about the last couple of years, about $10 million. For the last 2 years, we've received 13 and 15 million non-recurring. Our base budget is 2 million recurring for the program.
Do you have TAEP there as well on how much you spend annually?
I do not. The base budget, as Andy said, was 26.5, and we spend the majority of that each year. The only carryover that we have is just due to timing of when we pay out those grants.
And the TAEP program is a program that's evolving. Every year you're adding to and you're streamlining it. That's the way that works, I'm understanding.
You're recognized, sir.
Yeah. So we develop an advisory group that convenes at least once or twice a year. And we take their recommendations and look at those. And we're constantly trying to streamline that. And it's changed quite a bit in the last 5 years. Yes. The biggest thing we've done in the last couple of years is online application. We're trying to go all electronic. That's been really good and show quite the efficiency. We thought we'd have maybe some problems with the new system, and we had more applications and got it done quicker, and we have all that data, and it's just been a good thing.
And I'll try to wrap it up here too, Chairman. Last week we had ECD in here, and I was talking to them about the ag industry, especially in West Tennessee. We've taken a significant hit because of the corn prices and soybean prices and cotton prices. Well, in order for people to stay in the business, you've got to be profitable. So my encouragement to them was to look at ways to strengthen current markets and create new ones. And they were talking about different tools they had and working with you guys. Do you guys have that tool? If we have an opportunity to come up and expand a market or strengthen a market, do you guys have the tools at your disposal to go in and maybe give those investments to make sure that project comes to fruition?
Yeah, well, I'll start on it and Annie can finish. So we have the best relationship with ECD that we've ever had, and we work hand in glove with those. And you want to address the follow-up to that?
So thank you again for the question, Chairman Grills. And we do feel like we have some opportunities. I actually, upon leaving the General Assembly and coming to the department, recognized pretty quickly that even though we had a great relationship with ECD, we had a very different opinion on what really qualified as a rural economic development project. And I understand that ECD is statutorily bound with some constraints that we're not necessarily constrained to. And so upon having conversations with ECD, with assistant commissioners there, and recognizing that it was going to be hard for us to ever help ECD be in a position to be able to incentivize maybe in your county, Representative, a large grain handling facility that may institute the development of 15 new jobs, which for us, we're not really concerned about jobs necessarily. We're interested in what's the basis, what's the additional basis on each bushel of corn, bushel of soybeans that can come through that facility. And that's really where we receive the economic benefit, is not necessarily the number of people that are now newly employed. And so I went to Commissioner Hatcher and said, hey, I really think that we should have something similar, an agricultural version of the fast track. And Commissioner was able to speak with Governor Lee, and obviously the General Assembly granted an additional set of funding for us so that we could do economic development projects through these ag track dollars. And that is actually the $15 million recurring value that you saw on the first slide. That's actually a reference to that fund. And what that will do is that will give us a permanent opportunity into the future, because we have been somewhat tepid in the last couple of years not to overpromise the opportunity to do economic development, not knowing if those dollars are going to be recurring or not. Now that we know those dollars are recurring, I think we can do a more robust marketing plan to basically say, if you have these economic agricultural, economic, or forestry development projects, we're going to be a long-lived sustainable partner to try to bring those expansions here to Tennessee. And we're seeing that from an international standpoint. I take calls regularly from out of the country, and we most assuredly hear calls almost every day from partners out of the state who want to make development within the state. Tennessee Agriculture and Forestry, and again, to kind of piggyback off Commissioner Hatcher's comments, is in a tough spot financially right now, but the outlook for ag and forestry is as bright as it's ever been. We're still attracting investment. We're still attracting youth into the industry. We need to continue that and continue to do a better job of that. But the outlook for ag and forestry is bright, but we are certainly in a position right now where there is some financial instability.
Commissioner Hatcher, I think you had something to add. I'll recognize you.
Yes, sir. The Ag Enterprise Fund has the highest return on investment of any of the programs we have at 17.55.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And my last comment was I really appreciate the effort you guys are putting forth and understanding the ag economy has taken a beating over the past year, 18 months, and we're concerned about land loss. My opinion, the best way to keep from losing farmland is for every farmer to be as profitable as possible. So when they're profitable, they don't have to sell their farms in order to stay in business. So that would be my final comment. Thank you so much for what you do.
All right, thank you. And just a quick question. I want to switch over. I know you guys mentioned, or Commissioner, you mentioned the 4-H as well as the FFA grants. Could you talk a little bit about what I think, let's see, 92.5 million has been included in the budget for capital investments. Of that, about 500,000 is going to be recurring. Can you talk about, number one, the capital projects, but then talk about as far as the 500,000 that's going to be recurring, what's that going to be covering? We'll start there.
Okay, so we have Philip Baker and we also have Mr. Hensley in the audience. Could I bring them forward?
Absolutely, please do so.
Okay.
And as they come up, members' dashboard was down. It's back up now. Looks like it is working. So if you want to jump on there and pull these documents down, you should be able to.
And as they get seated, so we've been working on this concept, this proposal for several years, and the governor seemed to like it this year. And it's as I said before, 4-H and FFA they're some of our best. They're tried and proven programs. We know they work. We've leaned in. We have FFA people in house with the department now, and we work every day with 4-H and FFA. And so we love these capital projects and the investment, and they're statewide, so they can carry it from here on your specific question.
Chairman Hicks, to your question specifically about the 5. Oh, I'm sorry. I should tell you, I'm Philip Baker, and I'm the chairman. I'm a volunteer, but I'm the chairman of the Tennessee FFA Foundation Board of Directors. My day job, I'm a local Farm Bureau manager in Putnam County in Cookeville, but for about 25 years, I've served on the board of directors for the Tennessee FFA Foundation. Our board is made up of stakeholders who see the value of investing in agricultural education and FFA here in Tennessee. I myself am a product of both 4-H and FFA and have children who are also products of 4-H and FFA as well. Specifically to the 500,000, Chairman Hicks, that you mentioned, beginning under the Bredesen administration, back in that day, that administration saw the benefit and the value of investing annually in those two, in our organizations, 4-H and FFA, and specifically for now a number of years, the state has made that annual investment in the FFA, and they do that through the FFA Foundation. We specifically use those funds to provide for the opportunity for every student in Tennessee who is an agricultural education student, about 35,000, to also be an FFA member. And there's a small cost associated with that, but by being both an FFA member while they are an agriculture student, what they benefit from is the full suite of opportunities that come through the FFA and Ag Ed programs in over 200 schools, public, private, and homeschool partnerships across the state. And so specifically to your question, the 500,000, the 250 that goes to FFA is used for that purpose. And Mr. Hensley from 4-H can speak to the 4-H.
Good morning. I'm Ryan Hensley, I'm Director of the 4-H Foundation. So for the 250 that's been coming to 4-H, and Philip did an excellent job explaining the history of that. Most of you all have probably seen our 4-H Congress event, the Green Sweaters, that'll be here in a couple of weeks. So we have several events that over the course of the year that recurring funding has helped us pay for. Congress is a major event, very expensive to be here in Nashville, as you all know. So it goes a long way to help with that. Helps with Roundup, which is our project achievement. 4-H is based around 29 project areas. So the young people who have excelled in their project work are invited to an event, and they come and do a job interview style interview with us, as well as present their records from their project, and we select a state winner from that. So there's several big functions that it helps us support on that $250,000. Happy to go into more detail if there's questions about that. Would you like for me to jump on to the capital projects?
Please, if you don't mind.
Absolutely. So for 4-H, we're actually dividing these funds out over 5 camps or centers. We have 4 state-owned 4-H centers, one in Greenville, Crossville, Columbia, and Middleton, so all across the state. And that's where the majority of the funds are being spent, roughly $11 million-ish to each facility. For 3 of the centers, we're planning on building a STEM center or a STEM building at our 4-H centers. So right now we are running about 21,000 young people through these centers every year. We have about 151,000 members in Tennessee, and we think we can increase the reach at these centers pretty dramatically with these STEM centers. So the STEM centers are going to be classroom space, laboratory space, multi-purpose space for when we have youth out to these centers, that we can take the outdoor education we're doing, like the ecology, conservation, physics, astronomy, all these things that we're doing at the centers, and we'll have a place where we can talk about it. We can go outside and do it. And the nice thing that we strive for in 4-H is to make sure that these kids that are attending are also, what they're doing is tied to state educational standards. So the majority, this is maybe a fallacy that a lot of you have, that the 4-H centers are a summer camping program, which yes, we are. We definitely have summer camp. You may have done it as a kid. Your kids may have attended. 5,000 or 6,000 of those youth who come through our centers is that traditional summer camping program. But by far and away, our biggest program is our school enrichment programs we offer that run through these STEM centers. So local and regional schools come into our facilities and utilize our space, and we take what they're learning in the classroom and apply it hands-on. So that's what we're planning on doing with that. The one exception to this is our facility at Lone Oaks in Middleton, which is our current camp, our newest camp. We actually built the STEM center first. That was our first priority, get the educational component done. The problem is we don't have enough cabin space to hold kids if they want to come for an overnight program. We can't camp all the young people in West Tennessee at that facility. So what we would like to do is take about a quarter of that money and build a set of new cabins that'll get us to 128 beds at the facility, which we think will accommodate the majority of West Tennessee for overnight camping. And if schools want to have overnight programs, it allows us to take a whole grade from a school in most cases. So we're pretty excited about that opportunity as well, to get the STEM center fully functioning because of the additional cabin space for that one. And then the final camp that we actually are in partnership with is Camp Woodley. It's a very small camp, very rustic. We're looking at some land acquisition around Camp Woodley to protect that. It's very rustic, so we're trying to keep that piece. We do a pioneer camp out there. Very small amount of the money is going to go to land acquisition and some very minor improvements, running water in some places. So when I say rustic, it's very rustic. So we're looking at making some slight improvements there. Are there any other questions about our facility request?
I think that covered it for now. I'm sure there's some other questions we may come back to in just a second. Let's jump back over to Camp Clements just for a second. Fiscal year 24, $4 million non-recurring got appropriated. Can you speak a little bit about what got funded in that $4 million? Is all that money been spent at this time?
Certainly, it's a great question. Thank you, Chairman Hicks. So that money basically was deferred maintenance, a lot of ADA compliance. And we have a plan to tackle those projects over a number of years. Some of them are a little bit more involved than others, but mostly deferred maintenance and ADA compliance. If I may say a little bit more about the allocation for Camp Clements with a little bit of history. Camp Clements has been a leadership training center for the FFA here in Tennessee for 100 years, almost 100 years. It's the oldest FFA leadership training center in the nation. That camp facility has been leased to the state of Tennessee for about 50 years. And the last, all capital improvement projects during that period of time have primarily been taken care of at, that cost has been borne by the state, with the last capital project being approximately 30 years ago. And so the appropriation that the commissioner alluded to that the governor put in his budget would be a modern lodge facility that would both more than double the capacity of camp and the usage of camp. And much to Mr. Hensley's comments, while the term camp is in the name, this is really a leadership training center where our young men and women go during the summer and also throughout the year to learn those leadership skills. And 4-H and FFA, I think we all understand, is the talent pipeline for the agriculture industry here in Tennessee. And so Camp Clements, as long as these along with these 4-H centers, are those places where young leaders are molded and become that next generation of leader. And so this primarily will allow us to more than double the capacity and the usage of that facility.
Then my final question, we'll move on. As far as these capital projects, are there any external sources, any private partnerships? Can you speak on that?
So to that question, we do have a number of stakeholders, and I represent one of those stakeholder groups that invest in FFA regularly. The scope of this project is just merely, it's beyond our ability as a foundation to fund. And so the funds that we raise annually are presented to FFA members in the form of scholarships, opportunities that they would not otherwise have. And so our foundation dollars, we feel, are best used as we invest directly in those 35,000 FFA members across Tennessee and those 200 plus schools. We have been able to handle a few small projects over the years in terms of capital. We've recruited some stakeholders to help us with some smaller projects, but an investment of this size is simply both beyond our scope as a foundation, but perhaps is, as we visited with Governor Lee and talked with him, something that we would need the help from the state and I think we could all agree, I hope, that it would be seen as an investment in agricultural education and in the young men and women who are in the FFA in Tennessee.
All right, thank you. We'll move on to the next, let's see, the next person on the list is going to be Chairman Hawk. Chairman Hawk, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and Commissioner and your team. Thank you very much. I'm rekindled by the thoughts of Clyde Austin 4-H camp in Greene County and some of the great members I've got there. And as you mentioned, available 12 months out of the year. We can have a meeting there at any point in time. They do a great job serving us food and really do a good job taking care of us. So thank you. Commissioner, again, echo your comments earlier. Hurricane Helene has brought about devastating loss of agricultural land in Northeast Tennessee, and something we didn't ask for in addition to all the loss of agricultural land that we've lost by choice. This is not by choice. Well, some of the other losses are not by choice either, come to think of it, as I heard Deputy Commissioner Holt discuss that. Just to continue to keep the eye on the prize and help us all you can in Northeast Tennessee. I want to allow you to put your veterinarian hat back on and talk a little bit about the bird flu and the effects that we've seen in Tennessee. We've gone through several different agricultural outbreaks of this nature. Can you tell me a little bit about the financial aspects of it, poultry and egg production losses that we're seeing in Tennessee?
Yeah. So Dr. Beatty can make her way up here too, if you don't care, if you don't mind. She's the state veterinarian, but generally, oh my, I mean, we've been dealing with bird flu for years now. it's been evolving. There's the virus has changed. I mean, currently, what a mess we have on egg layers. It's been millions and millions of birds that have been depopulated, and that's caused egg prices to just skyrocket. In Tennessee, we're a poultry state in the fact that we supply, gosh, I think over 80% of the poultry meat genetics to the world, and so we're. When the virus begins to fall out of the sky, which it is now through migratory waterfowl, that makes biosecurity that much more important. That makes early detection and testing that much more important. And we just got back from Washington, D.C. I say we, the state departments of agriculture had our national meeting. And that was one of the biggest topics was bird flu, egg prices. And so I'm chair of the Animal Ag Committee for the National Association. And so we came forth with three action items or policy development items. One of them was for the establishment of a standing bird flu response plan to combat the high prices of egg prices. Take a look at indemnity because many of these farms are being devastated and they're worried about what kind of indemnity payments they're going to get. And then also a vaccine strategy because this virus has changed. We're to the point now where it's almost endemic and we feel like vaccination could be part of the strategy. So those action items were passed at our national meeting we just had and Secretary Rollins was there. It was her first public appearance and she confirmed or addressed all three of our concerns that day. So we're getting on the same page. Dr. Beatty can address what we're doing on the state level and how that's affecting some of our industry. And we're all up in it right now.
Thank you, Commissioner. Yeah, Dr. Samantha Beatty, state veterinarian, and I can say that it has been pretty much nonstop with the bird flu response since early 2022 when we were early on in the outbreak with Kentucky, sharing some zones. I think the biggest thing to be aware of is bird flu in any shape, form, or size will impact what we're able to do. And so even our backyard producers who have a small number of birds who may be sharing eggs with their neighbors or selling eggs off the roadside, if they're positive, then we do, through our cooperative agreement funding, work with USDA to report those to different entities, but it does immediately drop restrictions on our huge exports. So everybody with chickens is kind of in it, right? And it is a huge, it's a huge outreach mission. I think more and more people are aware of it now as things have, developed and continue to grow, and we have all these human health concerns that are making more of the news. But we've had a rough time, but I will say that we are fortunate that we haven't had some of the losses that some of the states north of us and even to our immediate east and west have had. But it does put us in a position to need to look at trying to control protein loss, considering things differently than we have in the past. Looking at vaccination is a huge topic among state veterinarians. It's still in the planning or developing phases. We don't even know if we have a vaccine that will work, but it's going to be very challenging to get us out of this situation, especially now that it seems to be that our livestock are also susceptible.
Chairman Hall.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And to our state veterinarian, as you mentioned, some of the partnerships with the federal government, we are looking at some potential changes there as states are being empowered to spend more of their own resources, financial resources on these. Tell me what does it look like if there are federal funds that are cut? What can we do as a state of Tennessee to ensure that we're still able to have these vaccine programs, the testing programs and things of that nature? If you could, and maybe just on a macro level, and the commissioner mentioned as well, what if scenarios if some federal funds go away? So both from the veterinarian perspective as well as from the commissioner perspective as well. Thank you.
Yes. So we are fortunate that the legislature has seen fit to help, provide a majority of our funding. We do rely on, and Samantha Wilson may have to help me out here, but our amount of cooperative agreement funding is not quite as large as some of the other divisions. However, a lot of what they do agree to pay are things like indemnity. They do reimburse us for the cost of testing. We have been in situations in the last 3 years where the federal government said, it's kind of your deal, and we weren't really prepared for that. We have since taken steps to be able to access emergency funds when we've been unable to respond. But I think having the experience that we've been left hanging, for lack of a more intelligent way to say that, by the federal government, we've learned how to kind of manipulate and work around that. We still are very reliant on them for indemnity because we don't have that ability. But when they have a vested interest in making sure that a response happens, they do indemnify, and that's what we rely on. So, but we do need to be prepared for those cuts that pay for things like emergency funding, because they have tapped into federal funds so deeply to pay for poultry indemnity and milk indemnity and that sort of thing.
Yeah, so from I guess from the national level, the commissioners and secretaries across the country are working directly with USDA, and we have been. Secretary Rawlins is going to begin every 2-week conversations as she begins to develop this national standing plan. There's a lot of unknowns. I don't know what the appetite's going to be. Will the federal government continue to pay the level of indemnity in millions of dollars that it's paying now? I don't know. So the plan needs to be looked at. Dr. Beatty talked about the vaccination part of it. That's a very complicated strategy, because we have to be careful how we use vaccinations, because it could affect international trade and really impact Tennessee in a negative way. So we're working as closely as we can with USDA, and those talks are ongoing, but I feel optimistic that they'll continue to support us in a big way.
All right, thank you. Our next speaker will be Leader Lamberth. You're recognized.
Did just want to say on the 4-H and FFA, both the recurring money and on the one-time funds, it's extremely critical, I think, to the success of our state and the success of agriculture. I say that as I don't know how many members on this panel here were in 4-H or FFA. I certainly was in both, enjoyed both. I was a 4-H counselor at one point. Those camps are really important. My children have gone. And I will say that Roundup, and I've said this publicly before, but when I went to 4-H Roundup, the 72nd 4-H Roundup, it's been a minute, it changed my life, because I met a lot of kids that were at Knoxville, were going to UT, and just as a small town farm kid, I thought, man, these kids aren't any different than me. And so, I could go to college. I could do whatever I wanted with my life. I could go back to the farm. I go to college. I could, go to college and come back to the farm afterwards. And it really opened up a whole new pathway for my life. So I appreciate 4-H and FFA both. I did just want to ask something about, what you'd mentioned a while ago, our state veterinarian here. You mentioned that when there are eggs that come across y'all's radar that may test positive for bird flu, that, and I don't want to misunderstand what you said, but it sounded like you said that you turn those folks into the USDA. Now, the inference might be there that don't let me make an inference. If they're turned over to the USDA, somebody who's got 6 chickens in the backyard or something and gives away eggs to a neighbor, and then that some other match makes it to y'all, and they test positive for bird flu, what happens to their chickens?
In the past 3 years, we have done everything from, depending on how close they are to commercial poultry, depopulation of that flock with indemnity, or we've been able to quarantine a couple of premises long-term when they've been far enough away from commercial poultry that they didn't present a threat. We do strive very hard to prepare, again, outreach and education to people about how to protect their birds, because, again, it's falling from the skies. But I have the trade restrictions that we have, and that come on from that, not necessarily is from turning people in. it's trying to work together to make sure that that doesn't spread to, if you have 9 birds that are affected, spreading to the 80,000 that are grandparent birds that are providing the genetics for the rest of the world, because I don't know how much longer we can keep depopulating birds and anticipate. I mean, we've seen what the price of eggs is doing, how long we could anticipate that our food supply would become strapped financially. So we also have a voluntary program through the National Poultry Improvement Plan that it's a national program, and that program allows for people to test their birds, and we do that for anybody. Our commercial folks participate and do a lot of their own testing, sending us results, or some part of their exports come through our laboratory. But we go out to any backyard producer that wants to be tested and test their birds to make sure that their birds are free of disease. And then we work to try to provide outreach for those folks, because we don't want birds to be sick. We don't want birds to stop commerce for all of us. And when that happens, you know, it impacts, when commerce is stopped, it impacts everybody from the guy on the line at the slaughter plant back to the producer who's got his house mortgaged to pay for his barn and who owns or has mortgaged on his genetics. All of those things factor into the decisions we make. And because even other states will refuse to take our product if we haven't demonstrated that we are responding in a way to try to stamp out the disease. And I have that discussion very frequently with other states, especially right now when they're all trying to move things. Thank you.
Leader Lamberth. Commissioner.
I think the commissioner wants to address it.
You're recognized.
Yeah, so bird flu is a reportable disease, both to the state and the federal government. It was a foreign animal disease, and I'd argue it's not anymore because we have it here in a big way. And you could also argue it's endemic. So that's why the plan needs to be upgraded. The vaccines need to be considered. We need to do whatever we can to get a handle on it.
Leader Lamberth.
Thank you. And this is a longer conversation for another time. We can have this outside of committee, but it does not appear to be the type of disease you're going to kill your way out of. And so this is a nationwide problem, but I mean, just killing flocks seems to, the only thing it's done is just skyrocket the price of eggs. But I mean, you know, there seems like there's at least multiple options there. And I will tell you, just as a lawyer, from a legal standpoint, it just gets a little unusual to, I don't know, when we're dealing with personal flocks. I was glad to hear you say that there are options to quarantine those flocks off, make it clear to folks, hey, look, you know, your flock's been, you know, at this point infected with this. You don't need to share your eggs with anybody. I mean, I don't know. I'm glad there are multiple different options beyond just going to the backside of my community and telling grandma she's got to kill her 6 chickens. So.
Yeah, you're exactly right. We need to change our strategy. And so I think everybody's realizing that. And so that's what we're in the process of doing but it starts with USDA because they're the ones that pay the indemnity right now.
Okay. I think a couple of y'all wanted to speak. I'll let you, Deputy Commissioner Holt, you go ahead.
Thank you very much. And I just want to say, we understand the concerns, and I will say that I have had lots of late night conversations with Dr. Beatty, trying to balance a lot of different situations. She's had an incredibly tough job over the last several years. And again, I've seen her on multiple occasions have to set her own personal thoughts to the side to try to address some of the federal restrictions that have been imposed upon her in her position. But she does need to maintain the ability to make decisions as a veterinarian, as a state veterinarian, that will do the best to try to make sure that we as a collective group of poultry producers remain in the best position that we can as a state. It has been extremely tough. Commissioner Hatcher and I have had several conversations with Dr. Beatty over the last several years. And again, I want you to know, Leader Lamberth and others, that we are in that constant balance of how do we best, most appropriately deal with this disease where there is honestly no great solution. Everywhere you look, there's further complications. There's, again, the view of imposing too much on private individuals. And there's also these concerns about global, literal famine-inducing opportunities, that if the disease were present enough and enough trade was restricted from the United States, that we could limit the amount of protein that we're able to supply into the world. And it would also have a huge financial impact on our producers. Again, I think very few people realize the depths of which our agriculture economy is really based off of poultry products and also poultry genetics. So again, if anybody has concerns about the process, we would ask that you would engage with us directly on that. Dr. Beatty is an open book. She's not going to hide anything from you. I think she's done an excellent job. And again, I'm saying this more as a personal, but also a professional plea that we're in a really tough situation in this particular situation. This is not the first. This is not going to be the last, unfortunately, foreign animal disease that we're going to deal with. This one has definitely over time, though, evolved into what I think Commissioner Hatcher appropriately says is almost an endemic disease. And again, thanks to the federal government taking an opportunity to relook at this situation, hopefully she's going to have some tools in her toolbox that are going to look very different over the next several months.
Later.
Thank you. So one of the things that I like to remind people is that I'm the state veterinarian for everybody with animals, right? Like if you've got 80,000 or you've got 8. And so I will say the small flock situations are the most emotionally charged. I don't like sending my people into any of them because the emotional toll of that much devastation is really hard. And we do have some programs through UT to assist with that. But I can tell you that this disease is very deadly. And there may be 20% of your birds that live, and there may be none. And because of weather, we're unable to get to a flock as quickly as we would have liked. And I will tell you, there's nothing more awful than seeing 20,000 birds affected, and there's no help for them, right? We know that there's no treatment right now. We know that there's no effective vaccine. And so while stamping out, again, is maybe not the best policy anymore, it was all we had up until recently. And then as we saw the virus mutate, we're having to rethink how we approach it. But again, a lot of what I do is driven by policy and guidance that is given to us by our federal partners so that we can stay in trade, not just domestically, but internationally. Thank you.
Leader Lambert.
I'll just say this, and again, I appreciate all the work that y'all put in, but I do hope that USDA and that y'all continue to look at different methods. I have followed this over the last several years, and I understand that early on that, trying to go in and just eradicate a flock, but if 20% of somebody's flock lives, at least it's 20%. When we go in and kill the whole flock at 0%. So, I understand that's kind of all that was there for a while, but it just, surely to goodness, at some point at this time in history, they can come up with something where we're not just continue to see the price of eggs skyrocket, because it does. It does at some point get to the point of affecting the entire global food source. So I know this is finance, and I didn't want to take us too far down this road. But look, my family was in the chicken business in the 70s. It's just, we haven't been in the chicken business for years. And that was meat birds, not eggs. But it's just, there's a lot of families out there, and members just know this, that throughout Tennessee that are losing their livelihood right now because of this disease. And then there's a whole lot of backyard flocks that have sprung up, where folks are even kind of nervous to even go buy new chicks or swap eggs, or it's a massive problem out there. So thank y'all for addressing it. I really appreciate it.
All right, members, we do have several people on the list. We've got about 6 minutes left, so I'm just going to ask that you keep your questions. We're going to get to everybody, but just keep your questions short and maybe your answers even shorter. So we're going to, Representative Shaw, you're recognized. All right, that's what I like to hear. Let's keep rolling here. Representative Sparks, you're next.
Yeah, thank you, Commissioner. Thank you, Andy. I just wanted to thank you for the support of Cultivate and good work that Joey and Courtney Langford are doing. My buddy Larry Maxwell, retired with y'all, is still involved with that. Just want, if you can say a few words of what they're doing in changing men's lives and hearts and education.
Yeah, what he's referring to is Cultivate's a program that's on our Ellington Ag Center campus, and it is a wonderful program that teaches people that have had tremendous alcohol or drug problems and gives them a second chance, and they get their hands in the dirt, and they have like a 50% success rate, which is unheard of. It's a wonderful program.
Chairman Grills, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I want to go back to the
to the egg issue, and I know everybody's talking about $6, $8 a dozen eggs. Proposition 12 from California, and a lot of folks over there, they passed that a few years ago. Explain, or in your opinion, does that have any bearing on what we're seeing as far as the egg prices now?
I don't think, the biggest problem has been the depopulation of millions of birds.
Okay.
I mean, it could have some relevance, but not much.
I was just wondering if those policies had, okay. Go ahead.
The majority of egg layers in Tennessee that have been depopulated have been pasture-raised organic egg layers. And because of the way that they're raised, are exposed, good, bad, or indifferent, that's just a fact. We do have broilers that have been impacted, but biosecurity is a big deal. And it's harder to provide biosecurity for birds with constant exposure to pastures. Thank you.
Chairman Greer.
Thank you.
All right, members, the list has cleared. So we have 4 minutes left. I don't see anyone else. Anyone else want to be on the list? Looking? All right. Commissioner, thank you. Thank you and your staff for being here. We certainly appreciate what you all do for the state of Tennessee. And again, thank you for your presentation this morning.
We appreciate the opportunity.
All right, thank you. All right, members, we will now ask the Tennessee Wildlife Resources Agency, and I did see Director Maxidon out there. We'll ask you please come forward. And Director, we'll just remind you and your staff that we will be controlling the microphone. So once you're recognized to speak, we'll turn your mic on for you so you don't have to worry about that. And Director, when you are ready, if you would begin by just introducing yourself and your staff. And you may begin when you're ready.
All right. Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and good morning, members of the committee. I first want to start by introducing our staff. We have most of our executive team that are up here with us today, and I'm proud to say we have a great team. We've got one new addition. I'm going to start with her, and that is Miss Blair Beatty. I hope maybe former Senator Bell might be listening, but we sort of upgraded this time. Mike went over to Commerce and Insurance and left us, and we upgraded to Blair, so we're excited to have her as part of our team. And then to the far right is going to be Deputy Director Frank Fiss. He is over our business operations, and Frank's been with us for a long time there. He was our fisheries chief and served in that role for a long time. To my left first is our Director of Budget, Mr. Ken Tarkington. Ken's been with us for 30 plus years. So Ken's had a long time with state service. And then to his left is going to be Deputy Director for our Field Operations. That's Brandon Ware. And then newly promoted to Assistant Director is our General Counsel, Tori Grimes. So we're excited to have Tori on there. And then we have one other member of our executive team that's not with us today, and that's our Communications Director, Miss Emily Buck. So, sir, I'm going to jump right into that presentation, and then we'll take any questions that you may have at the end. First, just want to say thank you for allowing us to come in and present that budget. And Blair, if you'll kind of click through the slides as I go. I think we're having trouble driving it. There we go.
I'm so sorry.
I think that's my fault. I think I unplugged it when I pulled it over. I'll just keep us going for time's sake. If we jump on that thing, maybe it'll pop up and we'll get you back on track. But really just want to start with a little bit of an overview of the agency. So we have 750 staff members at the Tennessee Wildlife Resources Agency. And most of you see our front-facing person as the wildlife officer, the game warden, the ones wearing the green uniform and used to drive green trucks. We've got silver or gray trucks now, but there's 250 of those commissioned officers scattered across the state. Most every one of you have at least one in your districts. Or in most of your counties that are in those districts. Some of the bigger areas actually may have two in those. We've got 350 field operations personnel. These would be our folks like wildlife management area managers, fish hatchery managers, and then probably the biggest backbone of the agency is what we call our wildlife technicians. These are the ones that do a lot of the on-the-ground work, like things like planting our crops and maintaining food plots. And then probably one that doesn't get recognized a lot in our agency is 150 business support staff. We have 5 offices scattered across the state. I'm proud to say that we're one of the few state agencies that require people to come in 5 days a week. And we do this because most of our customers want to be able to see somebody in person, and we actually sell hunting licenses, those different offices that we have across the state. One thing that we mentioned in the chairman's ag committee is about land. He was asking some questions about land. We manage about 1.6 million acres of land across the state. Now, some of that land is owned with other partners such as U.S. Forest Service, Tennessee Valley Authority, and U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. About 550,000 of that is state-owned, which is under the management of the Tennessee Wildlife Resources Agency. We have 137 different wildlife management areas. This is something we're very proud of. This is where many folks in your areas go to be able to hunt. Most of those are managed for habitat to try to keep healthy wildlife populations for people to go out there and hunt. We have 1,200 boat access areas. This is probably what you and your folks call about the most. This is going to be anything from a small parking lot with a little gravel ramp all the way to, say, a 200 paved slip with 3 or 4 different launch areas on there. But this is something that you call regularly about, that your constituents want, is just access to the water. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in just a second. And then 21 shooting ranges across the state. We have 4 of these that are manned. We're very proud to partner with other organizations, and we grant funds where there's even more shooting ranges that some of you have in your districts. But 21 of those are TWRA owned. 4 of those, we have people that are staffed there every day. The rest of those would be like on a wildlife management area. This is where if somebody has a deer rifle or just wants to go shoot a handgun, they can go out there and just do that at their own will on their own time. I'm proud to say that we are one of the most biodiverse states in the country. There's 49 species that are unique to Tennessee. There's 300 fish species, 400 bird species. And then we're probably most proud of the Rocky Mountain elk up in Northeast Tennessee, but we have 4 iconic big game species. That's bear, deer, turkey, and elk. And those are primarily what our big game hunters want to hunt for in Tennessee. Our outreach events. This is something that we really push hard. Hopefully you're seeing a lot of these occur in your areas. This is where we go out, tell the public about who we are, what we do, try to recruit folks into hunting and angling. We put on a lot of fishing rodeo events for youth. We put on first-time fowler events for, say, ladies that we're trying to introduce into waterfowl hunting. So hopefully you've seen some of these that have hit your areas. Again, we do about 100 of those a year. We're very proud to do those. We reach about 10,000 folks through boater education a year, about 8,500 through hunter education, and then our magazines. We're proud of the magazine that goes out. If you have a sportsman's license or you're a lifetime holder, you should be getting a copy of that magazine, and it shows a lot of the good work that our folks do and the great resources that we have in our state. Of course, we're here today to talk about our funding model. The primary source, historically at least, the primary source of funding for the Tennessee Wildlife Resources Agency is the sale of hunting and fishing licenses. We're thankful to all of you that purchased one of those. You've been carrying what I consider probably the group that affects more habitat on the ground and has probably done historically more for conservation than any other entity of the state, is the hunter and the angler. So thank you. If you're a licensed buyer, we greatly appreciate what you do for our state. The state funding sources that we have, a portion of that is going to be the marine fuel tax. This is where we use to enhance boat ramps, parking areas, and do infrastructure work. We also grant some of those dollars to the marinas through a grant process to be able to take better care of their marinas. And then the real estate transfer tax. We get 3.25% on 100, and that's considered what we call our wetlands acquisition fund. We'll talk a little bit more about that in just a second. One important thing for this agency is federal funding. That's about 38% of our revenue there. 29% of our revenue comes in for federal apportionment. As you all know, we have manufacturers in Tennessee like Beretta and Smith & Wesson. They have to pay an excise tax on those firearms and different ammunition that goes out the door. And those apportionments come to the different states across the country based on number of hunters and anglers, and then based on the amount of acreage that you have in that state. Now, this is big money. We have to spend that dollar out of our wildlife fund before we can get reimbursed. And we also use these funds for grants. So whenever we work on projects with, say, the University of Tennessee or Tennessee Tech University, and we do research or any projects that we grant to partners like the Tennessee Wildlife Federation or Resources Foundation, we use this federal money to be able to match. So they'll put up 25%, and then we will match most of those with 75%. If you have a shooting range in your area, if that shooting, like a private shooting range, if they'll put up 10%, we can actually match that with 90% federal dollars. So these are very important funds to the Wildlife Agency that come in. Now, we were asked to talk a little bit about challenges and initiatives. Our number one challenge is going to be our funding model. Our current funding model is just not working. It's not working for any other state in the country either. Primarily, as I said, we were funded through the sales of hunting and fishing licenses. Those models no longer work alone. You have to actually have other things to assist to have a good funding model. And here's what's happening. Our hunting license sales are stagnant. That's occurring in every state across this country. It's just because of the dynamics and the way that things have changed over time. There's not as many folks hunting and fishing. We're continually trying to recruit folks into that, and we're doing what's called a churn. So as the older age group moves out, younger folks are coming in, and so we're pretty much just remaining stagnant with that. And that's why that funding model is not going to continue to work in the future. We were 32% behind on CPI. Our last license fee increase was in 2015, and our agency, much like many of you that have businesses, prices have soared. Fertilizer, fuel, all the things that we use to put crops in and manage food plots has gone out the roof, as all of our other costs have. We are proud to say that the Fish and Wildlife Commission approved. I shouldn't say proud, that's the wrong word. We're glad that the Fish and Wildlife Commission approved it. Nobody likes to see a fee increase, but we found ourselves needing to go for that because of our budget situation. That will go through government operations, and it would be effective July 1, 2025 if approved. Talk about a good initiative. R3, that's retention, recruitment, and reactivation of hunters. This is a national movement across the country that all states have been working on. We're trying to recruit new folks into hunting and angling. We're trying to retain the ones that we have. And the ones that fall out, we're basically trying to get them back is the best way to put that. So these events that I talked about early on, we affected about 17,000 participants this year. I mean, we're doing a lot of these. We're asking our officers to do more and more in the communities. We've got great marketing campaigns where we go out and advertise these and try to get these folks and recruit them in. We have to do that just to remain level with our license sales and to try and create that churn. Again, we can grant funds to partner organizations. If any of you have had children or grandchildren in the Scholastic Shooting Sports Program that's operated by the Federation, that's a good example of one where we grant funds. The Hunting and Fishing Academy, we grant funds to be able to do that with some of our partner organizations to be able to recruit folks into hunting and angling. Another big challenge is access to land. This is what we hear from our users is the number one barrier to get people into hunting and angling. They want better access. They want more access to hunting property. They want more access to the water. I know you hear this a lot from people in your districts about those ramps and areas. They want to be able to get on the water, and we have to be able to create more of that. And we'll talk a little bit next about the land that we try to acquire and why we do that. I'm surprised I don't think our friends in ag talked about it, but I hear it all the time. We're losing about 10 acres every hour of ag land, in our state. And we used a statistics here, about 1,300 family farms and about 100,000 acres of farmland are lost annually. Well, that's also hunting land that's lost because many of these farms serve dual purposes. A lot of those folks either lease out the hunting rights or they allow people to hunt on their farms. So whenever that's taken out, that's also a loss in the ability to be able to hunt. Let's face it, land prices have soared in Tennessee. I mean, if you get across the state, you're looking at $10,000 an acre for a piece of property. Working class folks are not going to be able to go out and buy large tracts of land to hunt on anymore. It's just gotten out of their reach. That's what we hear from them. Hunting leases have soared. It's gotten very expensive. Used to, you could lease hunting property for $5-6 an acre. It's 12 up to 20, even more. If you try to lease a waterfowl blind for 60 days out in West Tennessee, they're going for $30,000 to $40,000 right now. People are trying to find them everywhere. So you get the point. Access is so important to be able to keep the next generation into hunting and angling. One of the other initiatives that we talked about is public access. I heard our partners say that more ADA accessibility. We're trying to get caught up. We've been behind on some of our areas, and we're really working on that. I talked about the figures about land, and Chairman Grills, I think you recently asked, how much land's enough and how much have y'all acquired? I got those numbers. Last year alone, we acquired 66,000 acres in FY24. Most of that was in one block in North Cumberland. There was about a 41,000 acre block up there. It's strip mine ground. A lot of that ground, we're able to get conservation easements on it. Some of it we do by fee simple, but most of it's not going to be anything that's good farmland. If you look over on the right of that slide, that shows more of what we normally would purchase in a year. Most of these things that we purchase are going to be small tracts. They're all from willing sellers, and we can only pay appraised value. And so these are the smaller tracts you see on the right. Most of them, again, join our WMAs. We try not to acquire any big tracts that are standalone just because we don't have the personnel right now to go out and manage those. So it's mainly smaller tracts that come available that touch us, or an in-holding or something like that. You can see most of those acreages are small, and most of those tracts over there are going to be wetlands tracts, and we use our wetlands acquisition fund to be able to purchase those. Another big challenge, and I think we just heard this from our partners, it's a balancing act. One of the things that they talked about was disease. They mentioned several times it's falling out of the skies. What they're talking about is snow geese. Basically, snow geese were falling out of the sky. It's been happening for the last several years. They will be migrating, coming south, and they will fall out of the sky from avian influenza and die. And they're putting this out on the landscape. Several of our wildlife populations are suffering. We had 60 sandhill cranes that died in Jackson County, Tennessee, a couple of weeks ago at Hiwassee Refuge from avian influenza. We sent those off, some of those birds, to get them tested, and they did test positive. We're also concerned for many of our wildlife species. We've been battling chronic wasting disease since 2018. It's slowly been moving across our state. We've been able to somewhat contain that. There is no cure for these diseases right now. So we're going to see this in a lot of our wildlife species moving forward. We're worried about our turkey populations. The hunters have done a great job. The turkey populations have finally rebounded. I'm worried about avian influenza getting in our turkey flocks. So we're just going to have to be careful and watch these things. There's no way to control these things. I mean, they're going to happen. But these are some of the things that we're going to be seeing in the foreseeable future. The other thing is, many of you probably saw in the news a lot this past year. There was a lot of human-bear conflicts, especially in Representative Faison's areas. You're getting about 13 million visitors in Sevier County through Pigeon Forge and Gatlinburg that are coming in and visiting. Most of these folks, I'll say this, a lot of these folks probably have not grown up around hunting, and they come there to see a bear, and unfortunately they want to touch a bear and feed a bear. And as it's growing out, you're seeing a lot of that area grow out into where the bears are. And so we're having more human and bear conflicts. And we're trying to mitigate that. We have a program called BearWise that you see there. We've got billboard signs up. We've got flashing signs up. We're working with all the partners in those local areas. We've been meeting with the folks at Gatlinburg. We just continually meet with everybody trying to educate people that these are wild animals. Don't touch them, don't feed them. But we're going to see more human bear conflicts as our population grows, and as we grow out into the wild with development, we're going to see more and more human bear conflicts over time. These are some of the challenges that we're facing. A couple of things that I'm proud to talk about are some great initiatives. You see Bill Dance's name up there. I think Bill Dance makes us all smile. He's a true gentleman. If any of you had time to spend time with him, he's just a legacy. You've heard from our partners up here of TDEC and tourism about using his name, image, and likeness. And we've been a big part of that program. We're proud to partner with these other state agencies. We're proud to use Bill Dance's name. 18 lakes that we're doing a lot of underground work on as far as fish structure and habitat. And then there was $10 million that was granted to TDEC that they've worked with us on that we will use above ground work for concessionaire buildings and bathrooms and such to really improve these areas. Better parking. We've been putting in a lot of courtesy docks, better launch areas, and we're looking forward to continuing to work on that project over the next couple of years to really enhance in your areas and really make these lakes even better. A couple of the things that we're looking into is paddlecraft. Right now, the paddlers aren't paying. And so I'll give you an example of what I'm talking about. If you're a recreational boater, you have to pay a boat registration to be able to use a launch area or go out there. If you're an angler, you're buying a fishing license and registering your boat. But if you're a paddler, you don't have to pay anything and you can use those same access areas. So we're working with different partners to try to figure out a way to, when these folks get on the water, to figure out a way to have them pay something into the system. Let's face it, we're growing in the state, which is a great thing for our economy. But if we grow like on a highway or a road, we can expand that road. We can't do that on a river. And so we're working with TDEC as one of our partners. You've seen in the governor's conservation initiative about blueways, but we're trying to partner with those agencies because we are the agency that's left when the problems happen on the water. We're the ones that respond to that if there's fatality or a boating accident. There is a carrying capacity on that water. And so we have to be careful with that, figure out what that carrying capacity is, and try to make it where it's fun for all users that get on the water to be able to do that. We're partnering better than I think we ever have. You heard Commissioner Hatcher say that. I think we're partnering better as a state agency with our partners at TDEC, with Ag. We've been working with Commissioner Bryson. We're looking at ways as a state lands group to really strategically purchase lands to make sure that they fit all users. Natchez Trace is a great example of that. There's a state forest, there's a WMA, there's a state park. And we have several areas across the state where we're actually able to use these lands cooperatively to best serve Tennesseans. So we're excited to be a part of that initiative. All right. In closing this thing, Mr. Chairman, when we get over to the budget part, I do want to talk a minute about our operating funds. Our communications director put this slide together, but we are different than the other state agencies, especially whenever we talk about our operating funds. And that is because of that those federal dollars that come into us. They don't allow us to commingle these funds. It's considered a federal diversion if we do that. So that's why we have them broken up and why we're a little bit different the way our budget operates. So we have a wildlife fund, a boating fund, and then that real estate transfer tax, which is that wetlands fund. And we do have a reserve account for each of those. So here's some examples in this next slide. If you look at wildlife, the income that's coming into that fund, about 38% of that is from license sales. About 37% is from that federal reimbursement. That's that Pittman-Robertson money that I talked about. And then 25% state and other. This would be things like farm contracts. We do allow farming on our property. And some of the examples where we spend those dollars would be on a wildlife management area, fish stocking. We are able to use some of that money for enforcement and in those shooting ranges that I mentioned. Now, the boating fund, again, which is separate because of federal reimbursement, that's Dingell Johnson money that comes into that program federally. There's 41% of that fund, the income that comes in from boat registrations, 25% from that federal reimbursement, and then 34% of the gasoline tax. We use that on safety and education on the water, enforcement, and then access ramps, courtesy docks, and those fishing piers that I mentioned. And then last is going to be our wetland fund. That's that real estate transfer tax. I mentioned 3.25% on 100 is what we get. We use this to purchase wetlands, and we also use this to do maintenance of TWRA-owned properties. So let's talk about our reserves. A lot of people say, why do you have reserves? Why do you need those? And why do you have so much? Well, really, it's not that much money. If you look at the wildlife fund, there's $63 million in reserves. This is only 6 months of operating costs. I mentioned before, we have to spend that dollar out of our wildlife fund before we can get federally reimbursed for that dollar. And as we went through with President Trump, as you saw what happened with some of the federal funding when it shut down for a few days, it did stop our Pittman and Robertson money. And a lot of our states were calling saying, hey, what are you guys going to do? I said, well, we're one of the fortunate ones that have a reserve, so we'll be able to do that. We'll be able to fund those costs. Our boating fund has $20 million. That's 16 months of operating costs. And then wetlands fund has $23 million. That's 15 months of operating costs within there. These reserves just provide consistency. If something goes wrong, if our license vendor shuts down, or many times when people change through their bid process with the license vendors, there are about 4 or 5 days that they can't sell licenses. So we will be down on income. This reserve would also help us at that time. Mr. Chairman, before you for a budget request, we're asking for $118,257,800 in wildlife, $18,445,500 in boating, and then $18,055,900 in wetland. Notice that $30 million that's up there. It's in asterisks. It looks a little different. We're very excited about this. We're very appreciative. We met with the governor, myself and several of our commissioners did on a couple of occasions. Again, we have found ourselves in a bit of a budget crunch. And you may say, why? Again, it was because we were 32% behind on that CPI. What we found is our prices are moving faster than what we can move with income. And so we went to the governor and said, hey, that's one of the reasons. The other reason is the salary compensation package. The other state agencies were given a general fund appropriation for that. We were not. We had to find ourselves figuring out a way to pay for the salary compensation. We're excited about that. If we hadn't implemented that, we think that a lot of our employees might have left and gone to other state agencies. So we're very thankful for that. We also saw an increase of about $900,000 in 1 year over year from STS. We follow all the state procedures that the other state agencies do. We go through CPS or CPO, we go through the State Building Commission. We go through general services to do all these things. So we're not different. A lot of folks will say y'all are different, but we're really not. We have to go through all the same processes they do. We brought that before the governor and talked about his conservation strategy. He is a hunter and angler, and I think he saw the importance of that. And that's why that general fund appropriation of 30 million was there, because when you total up everything that's happened with the salary compensation, STS, and the CPI, we found ourselves behind about $15 million annually there. So grateful for that. And at this time, I'll close out and leave that before you as a request, Mr. Chairman.
All right, Director, thank you very much. Very good presentation, good information. We will begin with our questions with Chairman Faison. You're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Directors, good to see you and all the TWRA. Thank y'all for being here. Committee, I just want to make a statement first and then make an observation. You said that sales are flat when it comes to license fees. And I don't know how many of y'all are hunters on here. Maybe y'all all have quite a bit more money than I, but I have 4 boys. They're all hunters and fishers, all 4 seasons of the year. They want to be a part of it. So for somebody like me, including myself, that's 5 of us. The annual sportsman's license, $200. You add any stamps on top of that, you're looking at, it could be easily $250 a person. So you're looking between $1,000 and $1,500 just for my family. And I know the TWRA says, well, y'all don't appropriate any money, because if you compare us to all the other states, we're considerably higher than every contiguous state, all 9 contiguous states. Matter of fact, it's cheaper to me get an out-of-state license in South Carolina and hunt than it is for me as a resident to hunt here. And then we hear that there's a budget shortfall. So first of all, my statement is I think a lot of people where I live, they don't have that kind of money. If you got a boy or 2 or a daughter who wants to hunt, we've got ourselves in a situation that they can't afford to hunt. I think that's probably one of the reasons that our license sales are flat. Number 2, the state of Tennessee, we're not given any direct appropriations. So the only way they can pay for what they've got to do is through fees. So I think we as a state should consider, should we start doing some appropriations, number 1. And then number 2, for the rest of us, Director, in the living world, when we can't make our budget, we have to cut. And when I looked at your appropriations and all the stuff you're involved in, and I've talked to Dr. Grimes over there, I think maybe the TWRA should say, is there stuff that we're using funds on that we just can't afford right now? Seeing that we're at a budget shortfall of 30 million, I'm like, you can't raise fees again. People who have several children and work for a living just can't afford to hunt and fish anymore. So what that leads to is people are going to start breaking the law to hunt and fish. And because you just can't afford to pay $250 everybody in your family. So I want us to consider as a state, what should we do? Should we be invested in this? Number 1. And then number 2, I would love the TWRA to do what the rest of us in America do when we can't meet our budget. We trim something. And so that would just be my only thoughts. And if you want to answer that, I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Director?
Yes, sure. Maybe a comment. I don't know if I have the right answers. I wish I had all the answers, and I don't. But you're exactly right. So just to be transparent with the committee, we are one of the highest in the Southeast on our license fees. We've looked at all the bordering states. We look at what we offer. Now, we do offer more than most of those states, especially like with the sportsman's license package. And when I say we offer more, what I'm getting at is like we stock more fish annually, and we have more hatcheries. There's many things that we offer that are in excess of some of our neighboring states. What's working for the neighboring states, and I'll give you an example, Missouri is one, Arkansas is one. Our states to the south, they use oil money, but Missouri and Arkansas have 1/8 of 1% of an earmarked tax on outdoor products. And I'm not asking you today, I'm just giving you an example of what's working in some of the states. I do think if we were able to get an appropriation like that we could reduce our license fees. That's about to the tune of about $130 million in Missouri. And that does not include their license fees. That's just the earmarked portion of that tax on outdoor products. It's about $43 million, $46 million annually in Arkansas. And they have all their license sales and other things, their federal match on top of all that. That's one thing that maybe at some point in the future, that we might be able to come back to this body with somewhere down the road. I know not now. It's not the right time. I don't feel that way. To the other part of what we have cut, I will say this team's been committed. We are making quite a few changes within this agency. We're trying to take a small bite of the apple at a time. But that's one of the things that this team is committed to. We've evaluated programs. We're sitting on over 20 officer vacancies now. Per se cuts, I can't tell you that we've gone in and just cut millions of dollars. We've repurposed positions as they've come open. We've done a lot of deferred maintenance. We're going to get behind. We've just said, hey, no more research right now, no more infrastructure projects other than what was already budgeted. 20-something officer vacancies, you're going to fill that. But as those folks go through retirements and they're aging out at age 60, we're not filling those positions. Now, we would like to come back and fill those. What we're starting to see because of that is they can't have good response times. Boating is about year-round now. And so in these counties that don't have an officer, we're having to bring one from multiple counties over. And boating is, like I say, become almost year-round now. But we are paying really close attention to the budget, and we will be looking at ways that we could cut. But when we do that, we know that we're going to cut services. I say this, and I know everybody, you would think they would say it, but we're a pretty slim and trim agency. I don't want to compare to a sister agency, but I'll give you an example of how I judge that to some extent. And I know it's different. They're a huge economic driver, and I don't mean this, but I just want you to see like what I'm talking about. I was a WMA manager for almost 20 years. I managed over 30,000 acres in Chairman Grills' district. I was a WMA manager. I had 2 wildlife technicians. We were managing over 30,000 plus acres, planting food plots, managing those properties. If you go like to a state park, just to give you an example, they're an economic driver in that community, but they may have 2 park rangers on 30 acres. It's just an example. Like I say, I'm not attacking our partners, but I'm kind of giving you an example of how I say we're slim and trim. I'm kind of comparing it to something else that's in Tennessee to kind of give you a feel for that.
Chairman Face.
Well, thank you for that. A follow-up. I saw that we have 1.4 million acres that we manage. I would love to see a analysis compared to the non-contiguous states. That seems 1.4 million acres in this state seems very weighted to me. I might be ignorantly looking at it, but I can't imagine what that costs to manage 1.4 million acres. And I've never really done a deep dive in your budget of where you should cut, but I know for the rest of us sitting up here, if there's more outgo at the end of the month than there is income, we cut. It don't matter if our kids get upset at us or not. And it would feel like to me when we're the highest of all non-contiguous states, regardless if we've given in or not, we are surely there's something we can do to not go any higher on our people. Thank you.
Yes, sir. All right. Thank you. Next on the list is Chairman Grills. You're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I just want to start off with giving you a shout out. I know TWRA has had a few bumps in the road over the past 10 to 15 years. And I think under your leadership, you've pulled that back in a positive direction. So I'll give you kudos for that. But I will also, now here's the but, I guess. When you're talking about needing dollars, and then we look at your presentation here and you've purchased 343 acres last year or acquired it. I don't know what those acres cost, but you're constantly purchasing more property, having to manage more property. And if your budget is continuing to shrink, why are you acquiring more property that's going to take an added expense to maintain?
Okay. Mr. Chairman.
You're recognized.
Yes, sir. And yes, sir, Chairman Grills, I hear you. So one of the things that we're doing, that's through the Wetlands Acquisition Fund. And there's only certain ways that set by statute here that we can actually spend that money. And one of those is on the purchase of property. So that money sits there unless we can be able to utilize it. And so we're kind of passively managing some of that property. So that was what I mentioned earlier. Typically, we don't go out and buy a standalone property because it would take more personnel to be able to manage that. I think our partners, every time they go buy a piece, they make sure they got a full staff to do that. We don't do that. So we only buy from willing sellers. We pay appraised value that touches our areas, that we already have a staff there. And a lot of that's passively managed, not all of it, but basically we're just trying to secure that for future generations. And we're doing it with that wetlands acquisition money. We rarely ever spend any wildlife fund dollars on the purchase of lands. It's only because that money can only be spent that way by statute.
Chairman Grills.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I appreciate your answer. I know a few years ago, we had the big duck blind debate, and it was back and forth about we're going to take these duck blinds and the state's going to build blinds on them. And I know you were not director then, so this is not your fault, but here's some fears that I have. And I was involved in that, and we were fearful that the state was going to build duck blinds, and they're going to take that responsibility to build these blinds, and then they're going to have to maintain them every year. And that's another, like Chairman Faison was talking about, these things that you're taking on, and then you add these added costs to the maintenance of them. That's the problem. And then when you go and you take these wetlands dollars you're using, wildlife dollars you're using, you go in and you buy these properties, you take them off the tax roll, or you get them in lieu of taxes. It freezes those values, so it hurts the actual property tax values of the counties. So every county and every landowner in those counties have to pay an additional fee to maintain property that their state has bought. That's a fear I have as well. Not only that, whenever you come in and you buy these properties along these rivers, primarily like the Obion River, for instance, the management is not near as intense as it was when the private property owner owned it. And they would go in and clean the ditches out, and they would make sure that it was draining properly. Well, now what we're seeing is the sediment is filling up, the ditches are filling up, beaver dams are being built, and it's causing the property that's maybe further away from the rivers to now flood and become a less value to that property owner. So those are some of the instances that I'm fearful of that we're going to see expand if TWRA continues to acquire more property. And I don't know if that's a question as much as it is a statement, but I appreciate always having a willing ear to listen. But those are some fears I have, and I really just would like to see the state of Tennessee own less property and let the private market dictate who owns it.
Director, you recognize.
Mr. Chairman, just to kind of, and thank you for that, Chairman. Chairman and I have had this discussion many times.
He knew this was coming, by the way.
I did, but maybe to point something out to the committee on that. One thing, and I use the duck blinds as an example. I know that was a controversial thing, and especially in West Tennessee, because, it changed what had been happening historically for a long time. We wound up with 42 duck blinds that the state purchased, and we continue to maintain those. And it is going to be at a cost. They're a well-built blind that we haven't had to do any maintenance on yet. It will come at some point down the road. One thing that we don't have to present you today, we've got an old study that we did with the University of Tennessee from 2019, and we do pay the pilot taxes. We continue to pay those, and I realize that it didn't go up over time, but these are economic drivers in the community. What's happening, if you drive into Dyersburg, Tennessee on a Friday night, you're going to see at every hotel a trailer behind a truck with decoys on it. So we have a draw system, and it just keeps turning and repeating itself every week in those 42 blinds and in those communities. And so it is driving the economy there. We may not be paying the increase in taxes that would come after pilot, but we are putting heads in beds. They are eating in the restaurants. They are going into your buying outdoor products in those areas. So I think it's building back on the other side of that. I do. And we do get behind on maintenance. I mean, that's just the truth on some of these areas because of our low staff. We just don't have as many staff out there that do that. So we try every call that comes from a farmer or an issue with a beaver, we try to go out and take care of that. But sometimes we do get behind on that maintenance. So Chairman, I definitely hear you on that standpoint of it.
And I think you do a pretty good job of being responsive to those calls. But we don't know the economic impact that we're having on these small communities from this new blind system versus the old blind system, because there was no economic study done to find out where we were or where we are. And that was fearful. One other question here, and I'll let somebody else take over. I know you manage a lot of forest. I know 2 weeks ago, in the Ag Subcommittee, Blair brought it up and you brought it up. Ms. Heather Slayton with the Department of Forestry, we talked about last week in Ag Full. How much timber are you guys harvesting annually, and where are those dollars headed?
So we've been behind because I think 2 years ago, we wanted to follow the same protocols. We came back to you all. We were about a year without any timber sales, coming back to make sure by statute we were following the same rules that Division of Forestry is following. So we put those out through a bid process. But historically, before that, we were generating somewhere close to $800,000 a year. Again, our number one objective is wildlife habitat. We don't really go in and do any big clear cuts. We'll go in and do silvicultural practices like open up the canopy to put more wildlife habitat on the ground. But number one, we want wildlife habitat. The secondary benefit is revenue. And again, either through storm damage timber, which is a big part of it, or whenever we bid those out, it's somewhere around 800,000 is about what it averages out a year. And that comes back to our wildlife fund budget.
So the $800,000 a year with 1.6 million acres of property that you're managing, that seems to be low.
Yeah, now remember that 1.6 is management with partners, and a lot of that land we don't get to manage the timber on. So U.S. Forest Service, that would go to them, and that's a big portion of that. 550,000 is what is under state jurisdiction, and a good portion of that is wetland that wouldn't have high value timber on it.
So you're managing forestry, or is the Department of Agriculture Forestry Department managing it?
All right. So, well, let me go back. So 1.6 million acres is under our management. And so we don't get all management rights to that 1.6 million acres. So the U.S. Forest Service, Cherokee National Forest would be a good example of where we partner with another entity. They hold all the timber rights to that. We don't get to decide what gets cut on that. We wouldn't get any revenue from that. The only revenues that we could generate is from 550,000 acres, which is in state ownership under our jurisdiction. If we partner, say at Natchez Trace with ag, we may call that a wildlife management area. So we're managing for wildlife habitat, but they own the forest and they would get the revenue, which would come back to the state general fund. We wouldn't get any revenues off of that. Now, if we own it fee simple, if TWRA does, then we could generate revenue off of those forests. Does that help? Does that help explain that?
Maybe a little bit, but it seems to me that TWRA would manage the wildlife on any property that the state has, and that the Department of Forestry would manage the forest on any department that the state owns. And maybe TDEC would deal with all the other, be the go-between. And that way, these are the professionals in that field. You guys are professional in this field. So it seemed like that would be the best way to operate that. And if that forever, that's the way I kind of felt like it was. And then last couple of weeks, I've kind of seen that it's not. So, I mean, this may be a conversation. This may open up a can of worms, but have these conversations more and more. But my thoughts are, and I know there's other people, if you can't manage it properly, you probably shouldn't own it. And that's where we probably just need to.
Well, let me hit that if I can. So our number one objective is going to be wildlife habitat. Their number one objective may be a silvicultural practice. And for me, for example, like me, I've got a master's degree in forestry. We have a whole forestry division within TWRA that manages our property. But again, we manage it for wildlife habitat and not revenue. Revenue is a secondary objective of it. So the properties that are fee simple, that are under TWRA's ownership, our number one objective is going to be to get good habitat on the ground. And so our silvicultural practices would be a lot different. For example, if any of you are small game hunters, you want early successional habitat on the landscape. If you clear cut a forest and don't allow early successional habitat to come back, it may not be the greatest thing to do for wildlife. It's not bad if you do it in a small patch cut, but not vast acreages of it. And so their mission would be different than ours. Does that make sense?
I do. I understand what you're saying. I appreciate your time. And once again, I know we've had some pretty straightforward conversations in the past, and I appreciate you always coming back with a smile.
All right. Thank you, Chairman Grills. Next on the list, Chairman Hale. You're recognized, sir.
Thank you, Chairman. A couple of different things. Talk about the fees. I'm very much against a fee increase, as some of my fellow colleagues. But I look in the questionnaire, question 11 talks about the services provided and to whom they're provided, and hunters, anglers, and boaters. It appears to me that in 23-24, 718,674 hunters, and that's projected to increase over 31,000 to 750 in 24-25, and then going forward, and also an increase in anglers. But as we're increasing these fees, we're hitting everyday working Tennesseans. And then we've got, in my district, we have a major issue, and I get calls quite often from people that are paying these fees for boats and fishing and all of that, and they're they can't even get out there and enjoy the waterways for all of these canoe companies and dumping out several at one time. So I just don't understand, first of all, this part with the fee increase, because we're hitting these Tennesseans that are working families that just want to go out here and enjoy our own waterways, and then we're limiting them, and then also our hunters. So if you want to say anything to that.
No, sir, I don't have much more to add than what's already been said. I mean, we don't want to raise the fees either is the best way to describe that. We just got behind 32% behind CPI, and you all had set us up where we could keep caught up with the CPI that our commission could. And so that was why we came back with that fee increase to be able to do that. I hear you on the paddlers. I want them to be able to figure out a way to pay as well. We've actually had Chairman Bell out on the boat ramps all last year doing a survey because frankly, we don't know how many paddlers we have out there because we can't record it. There's no way for them to be able to have a fee, so we don't have a way to track that. And so hopefully at some point, we're trying to work with different partner organizations right now to figure out what's the best thing to come forward with. The Blue Ways Initiative is going to put more people on the water. And so we want to figure out what we think is the best path forward before we come back with this body to say, hey, we think they should be charged this amount. We just want to be able to figure out how many folks are really out there doing that from a private use and the commercial use as well.
Okay. Another question. When we look at the budget and when you look at what y'all are doing with the funds, I'd like to go back 10, 15, 20 years ago, maybe even further, as an agency, and then to get to where we are today. Has the agency increased our field officers or our resource officers?
No, sir. We've added paddlecraft officers. That's the only increase that we've had. We've been pretty much stagnant on the number of employees and the number of officers that we've had.
So in that period of time, what have we added on the upper end that's not out in the field?
As far as in the upper administration?
Yes, assistants and all of these things.
Very few. Our agency has not added any personnel. We're still managing, and to Chairman Grills' point, we're adding acres all the time and adding very little staff. I think there's 25, and I don't want to misquote this because a lot of this happened before me, but I think there's been like 25 personnel. 10 of those were for chronic wasting disease. 5 of those were for Asian carp. We get federal funding for the Asian carp. And then the paddlecraft officers that we added, I think 4 or 5 years ago. I'm gonna look at Deputy Fisk, but we added some paddlecraft officers about 4 or 5 years ago that are working on the waterways, primarily doing their work on the waterways.
So you can say to this committee today that because my family, we've hunted, we continue to hunt and fish and all this. I remember a time in my home county that we had 3 or 4 officers there. Now we don't even have one that lives in DeKalb County. A guy from Putnam County is covering DeKalb County now. Most recent one retired a few months ago. So you're telling me that as an agency that we have the same number of officers in the field working basically that we did 20 or 30 years ago and no more upper end staff. This comes back to management. I run a business, many in this committee run a business, and we have to look at the ones that's making us money, the ones that's taking care of what needs to be took care of, and those officers are very vital to the agency. So I think that as an agency, you need to look at that, and I just think there's some accountability there that we need to see from the agency that has not been done.
We'll get that back to you. Let me say this on, for example, and you're right, and you're going to see the services cut. The difference is we can't take that federal money and pay for that law enforcement officer. We can take federal money and reimburse different positions that are in the wildlife class. We can do that. And so that's why we chose to leave those 20 slots vacant, is because we wouldn't get that federal match to be able to match for law enforcement. If we could use that wetlands acquisition fund in a different way, we could actually take those wetlands dollars and be able to help fund those. We would love to put those 20 officers back in those counties.
But to Representative Faison's point, that's one of the areas where we're trying to cut and hold that as a cost savings to us right now.
One more thing, if I could, Chairman. So when we talk about land, y'all got some land in Cannon County that we asked about 2 years ago. There's some horse group that wanted to, Walking Horse Association group that wanted to be able to ride on some of the trails and even help to clean and kind of take care of the property a little bit. And that was kind of shot down. I just think that there's some areas that maybe you could, if you're going to have 1.6 million acres that y'all are over and stuff managing, there's some ways you could get creative in opportunities maybe to even get some revenue back from some of those places. So rather than just putting your hand up and saying no and not allowing and stuff. So, and that land was basically came through a drug acquisition and federal and stuff that the state ended up with that. So we just need to be looking at some opportunities there, either to get rid of some land or we need to find creative ways to let it help start creating some revenue. Thank you, Chairman.
All right, thank you. Next on the list, Chairman Vaughn, you recognize, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Director, good to see you and your staff today. I'm curious well, first off, let me say this with regards to the officers. I am concerned about the fact of the scourge that trespassing is having on hunting property for absentee owners, that somebody's going to get hurt around our state before it's all said and done, from folks basically not paying any attention to private property rights. And they believe that private property is theirs to trespass on and use as their own. And that's going to be a sad day if we can't get that situation under control around the state. And I know that whenever you're sitting here looking tight on budget dollars, your answer would probably be, give me some more agents and we'll take care of it. I think it's a deeper problem than that, but I think it's something that we've got to try to decide how we're going to deal with that, because I am concerned that either a trespasser or a landowner will face danger given the right circumstance in the future. But believe it or not, what I'd like to talk about is one of your reserve funds. I'm trying to figure out a few things about your wetlands funds. I've seen how it's funded. I see that it's got $23 million in it, but you say that's got 15 months of operating costs, but it's a capital, from what you said here, it's a capital acquisition fund. How did you come up with 15 months of operating out of that?
So what we typically spend that on is what I'm basing that on. So we spend around $15 million annually on maintenance and operations. So if we want to go out and do something on a management area, a building, a structure, whatever, we can use that money to do that. Then we typically spend somewhere around $5 million or so on acquisition of properties, just depending on what comes available that year. And then the rest of that money we put in that reserve, and we can't currently use that money for anything else besides that. And that's what builds that reserve there.
You recognize, Chairman.
Thank you. And how do you determine what the $5 million, how do you determine what parcels that you're going to acquire, and what is the thought process behind that? Our state is one of the most liberal states when it comes to environmental protection in the nation with regards to wetlands and mud holes. And so I'm trying to figure out who thinks that wetlands are endangered within this state. Why would we go out and spend this money to acquire it whenever it is virtually impossible? The real wetlands are not under threat of development. That's one of the fallacies that's been put forward by some of your fellow departments in this administration. They are not under threat. The environment's not under threat as a result of the development of true wetlands. Why are we acquiring them?
I'll let our partners comment on the other part. I want to stay out of that one. But the part where we're acquiring, we're just adding to that WMA. Again, that money's restricted on how we can spend it. We're doing that because of that barrier. That what I told you in the beginning of the presentation, our hunters are saying the number one barrier for them to be able to get out and hunt is access. And so when we go to look at what we're going to acquire, we try to find something that connects to that WMA that's from a willing seller. We're not going out and looking for these properties. These properties are coming to us. So these sellers are saying, hey, because we're conservation minded or because we know that joins you, we want to offer that to you for sale. And then we go through all the same state processes through SBC to be able to do that, to be able to acquire it. So it's really just to be able to add property for future generations to be able to hunt on that typically joins us.
Chairman Vaughn?
Well, I do respect the fact that you are, before you take somebody's property, you're paying them for it as opposed to the other way that we function around here, which is we make people pay someone else before they're allowed to use their own property. So I think that there's several layers of here that we have environmental protection. And I see that as something from my own perspective. When I look at it, wetlands around the state, again, have some of the most progressive protection systems in place in the nation. It is very difficult for anyone to deal with any type of wet spot on their property. And so why this body would choose to do that, I understand for access and rights for hunters, but at the same time, I wonder if we're just investing in things that don't need to be invested in as much as other things. I think it's a matter of priorities, and I think the protections for the environment are solidly in place by both our State Department of Environment and Conservation as well as the EPA and the Corps of Engineers. So I'm curious about that. Is that something that we still need now, and are those dollars better spent in another way? But that's one man's opinion. But anyway, thanks for being here.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Next on the list is Representative Capley. You're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Director. Hello. You spoke a little bit earlier about the Asian carp situation. I didn't quite catch what you said. If you could expand on that a little bit. Me and my brother fish for them, and I missed the state record by 7 pounds on a bow and arrow, so still a little ill about that. But if you could expand on that a little bit, I'd appreciate it.
Yes, sir. And I was just talking about the federal funding. So there was 5 positions that were back up this year. Those positions are funded through that federal money that we get to be able to help manage with the carp problem that we have. And so that was what I was talking about there.
Okay,
Those
awesome.
positions are back up. Yes, sir.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. Next on the list is Leader Cochran.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Commissioner, just one question on capital funding. So the proposed budget includes $30 million non-recurring general fund subsidy for TWRA capital projects. Can you tell us what those projects are, what you have planned, and then do those go through the State Building Commission?
Yes, sir. So first, they all go through the State Building Commission, and those are projects. We've got several. I don't have the list right here. Blair probably does, but we've got a list of properties. Buffalo Ridge, Hunter Education Center's one, Stones River. Sir, it's about 15 or 20, but most of them are going to be firing ranges, Hunter Education Centers. It's where we've done a lot of deferred maintenance on these properties just as a cost savings measure where we haven't been putting money into them. Most of them are going to be in your districts to be able to help enhance those areas. Our fish hatcheries, most of those things are getting in pretty rough shape because we've not gone in and done the maintenance on them that they need.
Gotcha.
So it would be used for those projects.
Okay, so you have specific projects lined up for the $30 million?
Yes, sir, we do.
Okay. And then just one quick follow-up, and this is more specific to my district. So the dredging of the pond at Green Cove, that's been going on for a while. And so Ms. Beatty was kind enough to give me an update on that over the weekend. I think it's due to be completed in September, anglers on the water in October. Can we please stick to that? That project has been taking, I've never dredged a pond. I don't do that a lot in my spare time, so I don't know what it entails, but we've been working on this for a while. So if we can get that back open to the people of Tellico Plains and Coker Creek, we would greatly appreciate it.
We do follow all CPO procedures, so we are working on getting that done, and it is scheduled for September to be able to do that.
Great. Thank you very much.
All right, I've got a question regarding Lake Halford. And so in fiscal year 24, which was the first year of TWRA's implementation of a $6 per day or $48 a year user fee at Lake Halford, according to the fiscal year 24 budget overview of Lake Halford, a total of $164,280 was generating revenue, $27,280 from daily annual fees, $31,500 from annual marina fees, and $105,500 from one-time dock permits. And so I guess the question that I'm asking is, can you provide an update of how these revenues are utilized? And are there plans to introduce additional revenue generating opportunities at Lake Halford, such as rental boats or bait and tackle?
Yes, sir. I'm going to do two things. We got two deputies. I'm going to toss the financial side to Deputy Fisk because he worked on that project for a long time as chief of fisheries. And then we may have Deputy Ware help on some of the different, where we are, to give you an update on where we are at Lake Halford.
Thank you.
Yes, I'm Frank Fisk, Deputy Director of Business Operations. We did, the numbers you have there, we did, it was our first year to be able to collect fees. We had the authorization in place, and we would like to see more funding collected. We think when we have a concessionaire in place, we'll get more compliance with our user fee that's required. We don't think we're anywhere near at an acceptable compliance rate there. And those funds go directly to our wildlife funds and are mixed in with that fund. They're not earmarked for future management of Lake Halford.
Okay. Can you talk a little bit about how much is Lake Halford being visited? And can you talk, what's the public response? What has it been to some of the fees that are being charged out there?
I've not heard anything. We have not done any surveys about opinions about the fees. When we took over that lake, we promised that we would keep everything as similar as possible, and we've done that. So there shouldn't be a much change in expectations for what they were used to, at least.
Okay.
I can say that much.
All right. Anything else from TWRA that you would like to share? Any closing remarks? Our time is up. We're 4 minutes early, so I appreciate that. Members, I have no one else on the list. So at this time, we'd like to thank you again. Thank you for being here. Thank you for a very thorough presentation. And at this time, we will ask the State Board of Education and Dr. Morrison, if you'll begin your way up to the front. And we'll just let you know, we will actually, with the new microphone system, we'll work the microphone so you don't have to worry about that. Maybe pause till you see the red light, and then we'll get your mic hot. Thank you for being here. We'll let you begin. If you'll just begin by introducing yourself and the team that you have with you.
Great. Yes. Thank you, Chairman Hicks. Nathan's become an expert at these new mics. I had my first experience in our Senate budget hearing, so I appreciate you taking the lead on that. My name is Sarah Morrison. I'm the Executive Director at the Tennessee State Board of Education. I'm happy to be here this morning to present our budget, answer any questions you may have about some of our programmatic activities. With me is Nathan James, who I know is no stranger to most of you. He's our Deputy Executive Director for Legislative and External Affairs, a mouthful. And next to him is Michael Derline, our other Deputy Executive Director, but over policy and research. So hopefully across the three of us, we'll be able to answer most of your questions this morning. Okay. Our budget is very straightforward and is essentially the same as last year, but Nathan has a couple points he wants to make as we go through those slides.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members. Our budget remains flat at $3.3 million. That's a payroll of $2,727,500 and an operational budget of $470,000.
Can we pause right there and everyone just look at that cost increase right there? That's what we like to see in case any other agency happens to be tuning in. Thank you. Sorry to interrupt.
Mr. Chairman, I'll tell you the green sheet, if it went back one more year, you'd see where we went from 17 million down to 2 million. That's one I particularly like, but we've timed out on that one. We did place a request for an attorney position. that was not funded, and that was 176,800, including salary and benefits. And that's related to our educator license discipline work. That's the situations where misconduct has been committed by educators, and it's our charge to make sure that that is adjudicated properly and follows their record from place to place. So basically prevents a person from just resigning and moving to another district and having the same situation going. So we had no supplemental requests last year, no reductions. And this takes us to educator license discipline.
Great. And I'll pick up here. The mic is on. There it is. Just to tag on to what Nathan was talking about with respect to our licensure discipline work, which is one of the areas that the board is charged under state law. And I'll read you some of these points, or at least elaborate a bit. As Nathan said, this position was not funded. We understand why it wasn't funded, but I also want to talk you through the rationale for that request. We are charged, again, as Nathan said, in the discipline area with respect to licensed educators. So it can be anything from a formal reprimand to a suspension based on the evidence that's presented from local education agencies with regard to licensure. We currently have 3 attorneys and 3 paralegals who handle all of that discipline intake, case review, negotiation, and settlement. We have seen, for a number of reasons, we think, the increase in misconduct reports each year. You can see in 2020, we had 407 reports. The last year, 2020, you can see that as an incredible increase. We think there are a number of reasons that I can go into if interested, but some of the laws that you all have passed that really put that responsibility squarely on the superintendent. Reporting cases in a timely way. As Nathan said, this is really about safety, and we want to ensure that we don't have any holes in the fence. You know, if there is something that happens at a local agency with respect to licensure discipline that needs to have a state action in a corollary way, we take that action so that the next district that might think about hiring that educator has full information about what happened and can look into that appropriately. On average, about 49 or half of those cases that are reported lead to open cases. There may be a lot of no actions that we take because many things that get reported are simply personnel matters handled at the local level. So part of the work of these attorneys and paralegals is to determine which cases rise to the level of a state licensure action and what things should be left in the personnel matters at the local district. I mentioned that we have the 3 attorneys. 1/3 of the caseload they carry each. So on average, they carry between 90 and 115 cases each at any time. Again, with the addition of a new full-time attorney, we would get down to 65 to 85 cases, which we think represents a more sustainable sort of caseload in perpetuity. Happy to come back to that if you have questions. I'll turn it over to Michael for a few thoughts on a couple other areas of responsibility for the board.
Thank you. So the state board is also responsible for facilitating the review of academic standards. This is on an 8-year cycle that recently shifted from a 6-year to an 8-year cycle thanks to legislation passed last year. This gives educators more time with the standards to be able to understand their strengths and weaknesses. That process begins with a public comment survey, a very substantive survey. For the social studies review, we had upwards of 125,000 comments that first round. We're currently in the ELA standards review, and we had 25,000 comments. Then we convene a team of expert educators. That group comes together, reviews that public feedback, and determines appropriate changes to make to the standards. A standards development committee then comes together to ensure alignment across grade bands, then put that to another public comment survey. Those comments are then put before the Standards Recommendation Committee. That is an appointed group of individuals from the governor and the speakers. And then those standards go before the state board on 2 readings. So just to highlight some of the work that we do in standards, it is a very substantive, educator-driven process. We are proud of it. And we are right in the middle of ELA standards. I believe our second survey has recently opened up. So if you know any ELA educators that would like to provide feedback, please let them know. We also are responsible for producing the educator preparation report card. This has been done now for 9 years. Last month, we produced our 9th report card. And we've seen steady improvements in key priority metrics such as licensure of teachers in high demand endorsement areas such as English as a second language, secondary science. We also are seeing improvement in new teacher retention. And as a result of engagement from educator preparation providers, districts, legislators, the Report Card Advisory Council, which we facilitate. We believe this is a very useful tool for all parties.
Just one more slide on a few things of note that the board is currently undertaking. As I know you know, we've certainly most recently passed legislation as a state about the Education Freedom Scholarships, which puts rulemaking authority in the hands of the state board. We've been working with our colleagues at the Department of Education to lay out a timeline to pass those rules with enough time to implement this coming school year. So what that will mean for us is a special called meeting on March 20th, where our board will hear the emergency rule on that scholarship fund and also the regular rule on first reading. We are likely to have another special called meeting, probably in early June, again, in order to effectuate those rules in time for the coming school year. So more to come on that. We have also in the last 1.5 to 2 years taken on some pretty serious work in the licensure space, not discipline, but really how do educators get licensed to teach in Tennessee. As I know you all know, in talking with educators, this is a perennial challenge to get right. We want to have high standards for our teachers and make sure that they are prepared when they get into the very challenging and very important work of educating our students. We also don't want to have undue barriers in that process. We want to get people in and get them trained. And so always trying to look at those licensure rules with an eye towards where can we be more efficient, where can we take away things that appear to be barriers for good teachers getting in. We've created what we call a licensure review committee. And 2 members of the General Assembly, including Representative Slater, serve on that committee, which has met several times. Michael leads this team. And several important recommendations have come out of that committee, including to do away with a performance assessment called the EdTPA, which may be something that's familiar to you, but it represents a lot of work on the part of educators. When we passed it, we had high hopes that that would really help our educator preparation programs and our educators come in more prepared. Multiple years later, it does seem to be a barrier and something that people have really been appreciative of the chance to move away from that assessment. So we passed that on final reading at our February board meeting, and we'll begin the process of implementing that change to licensure requirements for all educators in the coming months. So that's just one example of, again, how we're trying to look at our authority around licensure and ensure that we have the right expectations on the books, but again, no undue barriers to entry for our educators. We also continue to try to stay in close partnerships with our stakeholders, including legislators, our district leaders, our educators. We try to go to great lengths to bring our board members to districts to visit classrooms, talk with principals. We're grateful to Representative Sparks, who I know joined us in Murfreesboro recently for one of those days in the district. But it's important that our board members really understand the challenges and the opportunities that are playing out in our schools across the state. So we go to great lengths to try to bring our board members to the work so that they can come to our board meetings informed about what's happening in Tennessee schools. And then one last update that I wanted to share, because this seems like it had been a long time in the making, but we're now almost there. Starting next spring, about this time next year, we will, per statute that passed with the TISA legislation, begin to hold hearings for districts and public charter schools who receive a D or an F on 2 years in a row of their letter grades. Again, this was part of the TISA legislation. It gave us a relatively long on-ramp to plan for these hearings. So we've been meeting with district leaders, with national experts, looking at various ways that we can construct these hearings as we hope a really productive dialogue between district and charter leaders and state representatives, trying to understand both how that money is being spent and what are the opportunities in these perpetually failing schools to get better outcomes for students. And we know that is not an easy thing to undertake. This represents one additional way that the state is trying to shine some light on what's happening in some of our lower performing schools. So those hearings will begin next spring. Much more I can talk about there if you have questions. But with that, Chairman, I'll turn it back over to you.
All right. Thank you, Director Morrison. Thank you for your presentation. And again, thank you for being here. First person on the list will be Chairman Vaughn. Chairman Vaughn, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and appreciate y'all being here today. Last night, as I was prepping diligently for y'all's visit today, I noticed an interesting statistic with regards to some of the license restoration. I think that y'all restored 20 out of 23, y'all restored 20 of them last year. I think that was what was in the information submitted on your, no, I dug that up on your website. Could you go through, tell us a little bit more about what would bring somebody to successfully have their license restored? Well, let's start from the first. What would have caused them to lose it? How do they go through the process of getting it restored?
Yes, thank you for the question, and I will do my best to answer it. I'll say our general counsel was sick this morning. She'd planned to be with us, so if I omit anything, we'll follow up and make sure you have full information. But there are a number of things that might lead to a teacher losing their license. Obviously, some misconduct with students. It could be an egregious felony of the kind of, theft or some sort of, criminal charge. So there's a number of things that may or may not have as closely to do with student safety. And those that are furthest away from student safety, let's say it was, a theft or some sort of other criminal charge, if we think that looking at the record and the evidence that's submitted and, personal affirmations and letters of recommendation rise to the level of this educator having rehabilitated and after enough time being out of the classroom, then we might recommend restoration. Now, in terms of the actual cases that we have recommended restoration for in recent months or years, we could get details on that and send it to you because it is always interesting. Every case is different. And so I don't want to speak too generally about them, but we take them on a case-by-case basis. I'll tell you that. There's no blanket restoration clause that we use. It's really like, has this educator proven through the rehabilitation process and the evidence that they can submit that they are, not a threat to student safety, not a threat to the school district in any kind of criminal way. And it's a pretty high bar. So, there are cases where we think someone has met that bar and are restored with their license, but there are many others who are not. So happy to get some more information on that if you'd like it.
Thank you. I appreciate the individual attention to detail on each of those because you're right, every situation is different. But let me take it one step further. Is there a probationary period whenever someone has their license restored, or is the bar lowered with regards to things that cause licensure removal at that point in time?
Great question. So I should have said this. If you are revoked, it's a 5-year period. Point blank. You cannot be restored before 5 years. We can suspend a license for shorter times than that, but if we revoke a license, it's always at least 5 years.
All right. Thank you very much. That does me, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Chairman. Next on the list is Chairman Baum. Chairman Baum, you're recognized, sir.
Thank you, Chairman Hicks. I'm aware that the State Board has been tasked with defining adequate growth in TCAP scores for promotion from 3rd grade to 4th grade. Could you tell us what definition you all have settled on for how we define adequate growth on the TCAP score? And then maybe tell us whether this is information that our districts are aware of.
Yes, I'm only smiling because it is a little bit inside baseball. I'm going to do my best, Representative Baum, and then we will get back to you because I know there's some technical experts at the Department of Education who could do a much better job explaining. Michael, please jump in with any additional information. Essentially, remember, because this feels like a lifetime ago now, when we were creating that definition for adequate growth, we were looking at basically a baseline, which was the spring TCAP or retake, and then another assessment at the end of summer school. And so trying to align that kind of post data point at the end of summer school with TCAP required a lot of statistical modeling that the department has done. They presented that to us in a way that has given us confidence that it's as good as you can get, essentially. But we know it's not perfect and that they're apples to oranges. We're looking at TCAP assessment, and then we're looking at a post measure that's trying to be equated to TCAP to show relatively, given the time that a student was in summer school, what will we expect in terms of a reasonable amount of growth, knowing that they're not in their first full school year. It's really essentially a few weeks. And it's still a high bar to meet. We didn't see a ton of students meet it. We did see some meet it, but that's something we'll want to continue to revisit, I think, as a state, as we see this play out over multiple cohorts of students.
You recognize.
Seems like the answer isn't as clear as it's 5% growth or a score that's 10% higher. I mean, we can't say anything as definitive as that.
I'm trying to remember. I do believe it was like 5%, but I think that's right. I would like to check that, though, and get back to you to make sure I'm not sharing erroneous information. But that's my remembrance, is that it was essentially 5%.
Okay, thank you.
All right, thank you. Members, I have no one else on the list. Would anyone like to be recognized? Representative Shaw, you're recognized.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you all for being here. I just wondered, I was sitting here listening, why is there not more focus on early childhood intervention versus third grade, whatever. I'm just from the old school and I just need some help. I've always thought that we get better results out of our children when we focus on early childhood intervention programs that would focus on that. Can you talk about that a little bit?
I would be delighted to talk about that, Representative, because I feel strongly about this. For various reasons, and namely, we start administering a state assessment in third grade. So that gives us our best look at all students in a sort of representative way, in a securely administered assessment. But as the parent of early childhood students currently, I know, and I know many of you know, that the building blocks for reading and math happen much earlier than third grade, or should. The foundations of reading, our focus on the science of reading and the foundations of reading begin in preschool, kindergarten, first and second grade. That's when you're learning to read, not reading to learn, as we say, once you hit third grade. And so our board passed a resolution last year, had some discussion about that with various legislators, because it's not that we don't think third grade is an appropriate place to have a backstop for retention decisions. But now that we have universal screeners and data on early education starting in kindergarten, I would hope that our educators and our parents are looking at that data and making decisions about interventions, to your point, about retention if needed, much earlier in third grade, because I do believe that's going to benefit our students more when they're in the business of learning how to read, to have extra attention to those foundations of reading when the screener dictates that this is a student who would benefit from some of those interventions. So I would agree. I think early is better. I think sometimes at the state level, our data doesn't kick in until a little bit later. And so now that we have some of that early data, I think we do need to look at it and just work responsibly with educators to make sure they're sharing that with parents and with educators in the school to take action where it's needed.
I appreciate that, because I don't think we'll ever get the results we need at the third grade level. And this is just a comment, not anything you need to respond to, but I don't think we'll ever get the third grade results until we start with early childhood retention. That's the whole point. To me, it's kind of like you just a waste of money. You expect in third grades to do something that they were never trained to do. And so I just thought I'd bring it up since you all were here, but thank you. Appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thank you for the question.
Thank you. Next on the list, Chair Lady Moody, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and good to see each and every one of you. When we were talking about the summer school, a question popped up in my mind about how is the participation going with summer school? It seemed like when it first started, I think the teachers were excited and on board, and I think the parents were, but there were issues, with vacations, and also, do you have any of that trending?
Yes.
How is it trending now?
It's good to see you, Chairman.
Thank you.
Yes, and thank you for the question. We just had a presentation from the Department of Education at our February workshop about this very topic, and I will send you the slides because I don't want to get it wrong.
Thank you.
But the upshot was that we're seeing good participation in summer school. We're seeing good results to the tune of students who go to summer school do not see that same slide that we see in other students who are not going to summer school. And again, this is anecdotal as a parent. I've just signed my son up who's not in a remedial situation, but it is childcare in June. It is enrichment. And from what I've heard, kids are really loving it. I mean, educators are going to great lengths to make it a fun experience. So it's not just the drudgery of like regular school. It really feels different, I think, in most places. And so I think that's why we're seeing the uptick, is that initially parents thought, oh, this is interfering with vacation, or it felt like a punitive measure. And certainly if you're going in third or fourth grade because you have to, I'm sure that feels different than an optional registration. But I think it represents, again, to Representative Shaw's point, if we can give more of those opportunities for students to get additional learning, especially in the early grades, I think it is a good use of our resources to continue to provide that to our students and our families.
That sounds exciting, and appreciate the effort to offer many ways to get those kids caught up and liking reading and all the things we are desperately needing them for their sake and for our state. Thank you for all your work. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Representative Sparks, you're recognized.
Thank you for the great job y'all do. I just want to pick up on Chairman Vaughn's concern about teacher misconduct. It's pretty alarming in 2020. 407 incidents, and now last year, 2024, 919 incidents. Is there a common denominator with what's going on?
Thank you for the question. This is something we're constantly trying to dig into and understand the reasons for those increased cases. Like I said, I do think one of the big reasons is that you all have passed a law that now really puts directors in the hot seat for ensuring timely reporting. They can have an action taken against their educator's license if they have failure to report. So that certainly has helped make sure that this is on the radar of all of our directors of schools. I also think the outreach that we've done to try to, again, we've got a lot of educators who are in non-public schools or private schools that employ licensed educators who have a duty to report, charter schools similarly. There's more outreach that we would like to do, but again, we're kind of currently constrained with our capacity with our attorneys. And so I think there's a number of reasons. I think there's more awareness, and I also think people are feeling that responsibility more fully.
Yes. Real quick, Chairman, if you could elaborate on the mental health and what you're seeing with the rise in mental health, and is it at an all-time level throughout your career?
Certainly from what our educators experience and report to us, I mean, we're seeing more educators who, they kind of break under the pressure oftentimes. And that sometimes is what we're seeing is that especially those that are working with vulnerable students who have a harder time with behavior. We see educators who need additional training in order to really be the adult that's needed for those students. And then, yes, just in terms of the services that our schools have requested, we've continued to see more resources going to school psychologists, social workers, more counselors, just in an effort to really meet students where they are and ensure that they have the services that they need to be able to then focus on the academics.
Yes, thank you, ma'am.
All right, thank you. Next on the list is Chairman Hale. You're recognized.
There we go. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you, Chairman. Talking about behavioral issues, we are seeing a struggle with teachers. Got a text, I think it was Saturday night as I was sitting at home, 8 o'clock from a teacher. One was a parent had thought that a teacher had turned her into DCS, and then so she goes to the sheriff's department wanting a warrant, and she loses her baby. She's going to sue. The teacher's going to sue. But then, so you've got that issue, but we've got a major issue with behavioral, and I know y'all hear it, see it. It's going to get to the point that we can't even get teachers to deal with these because there's no protection for the teachers. And I understand there's some of these things that are federal that we have to abide by and adhere to, but what are we doing as a state to take care of our teachers also? Can you kind of?
Yeah, thank you for that question. I don't think there's a silver bullet. I do think, though, the additional resources that we're trying to pour into schools for those additional personnel who can help pull out a student who's having a really hard day. Because I know as a former educator, you might have 23 kids in your class and you have one who's having a really off day, and that can change the dynamic for the entire class. And so having those staff in the building who can help when a student's having a hard time, take them to a calm down corner or calm down area, work with them outside of academic instructional time on the things that are causing those behaviors. I think that is part of the solution. And then I think, one of the things that we see through the educator discipline work that we do is retraining of teachers in terms of how to de-escalate situations. How do you handle a student who's kind of off the rails? I mean, I think that needs to be built into our educator preparation programs and, more of that. It's not just classroom management anymore. It's really behavioral management and understanding the root causes. Because I think oftentimes, we don't know the why for a student's outburst. And, my experience, they are just, they are so raw in their emotions. It's not that they're trying to be hard, but they just don't know how, they don't have the skills yet to handle those feelings. And so more training that we can do of our teachers to be able to understand and work with students and set up classrooms in a way that kind of accounts for those feelings and the needs that students have, and increasingly so. I think those things will help. But again, I don't think there's a silver bullet. I think we just have to work to make sure we have additional resources and training for our educators.
Okay, thank you so much.
All right, thank you. Members, I have no one else on the list, so I do want to thank you all. Thank you, Director, for being here. Thank you for your staff, and thank you for your presentation. All right. Members, without objection, we will go back into session. Without objection, we're back in session. That does complete our calendar for today. Just a reminder, the budget hearings will resume tomorrow, Tuesday, March 4th at 3 p.m. here in House Hearing Room 1. Members, any further business coming before the committee? Hearing none and seeing none, without objection, we do stand adjourned. We're adjourned.